Chapter 23. The five-element divine sand that Zhang Yan usually saw was measured in kilograms, but this person said 1,000 kilograms. He wondered if he had heard wrongly. In fact, every disciple of the lower house was worshipped by relatives of the royal family. The five-element divine sand was rare, but it could be found all over the East Hua continent. As long as one was willing to put in the manpower, it was not difficult to collect. In the past, when the large sects collected the divine sand, they relied on the commoners to control a large number of people. For example, Chao Ying. Her father was the duke of a land. With one word, he could mobilize the manpower of hundreds of thousands of people. Although she didn't have that much power, and most of the matters in the family were handled by her brothers, she could mobilize tens of thousands of people. Seeing that Zhang Yan did not reply for a long time, she thought that he was not satisfied. She gritted her teeth and said, "This year, the upper reaches of the Long River have been frozen. It is difficult for boats to travel, and it is not easy to collect the divine sand. Next spring, I am willing to add another 1,000 kilograms, for a total of 2,000 kilograms. What does Immortal Master Zhang think?" Seeing that she misunderstood, Zhang Yan did not explain. He said lightly, "Okay." Chao Ying sighed in relief. She did not have the time to look at Zhang Yan. Now that she saw him, even with her experience, she could not help but praise him. Zhang Yan was handsome, with a sharp nose, lips pressed into a thin line, and shoulders wide open. Just by sitting there, his physique was much larger than an ordinary person. In addition, after Yuancheng entered enlightenment, he already had the faint aura of an immortal, which added to his otherworldly aura. Yes, other than this, is there anything else? Seeing Zhang Yan's deep and bottomless gaze sweep over, Chao Ying hurriedly lowered her head. Her heart was beating wildly. She replied, "If Immortal Master has any mortal matters, you can tell us to do it." Originally, she had brought 50 slaves with her to send to Zhang Yan, but Zhao Yuan had previously reminded her that Zhang Yan didn't seem to like having more servants. Moreover, this was the first time she and Zhang Yan had met, so she didn't dare to rashly mention it. Now that she saw that Zhang Yan seemed to have the intention of sending her off, she didn't dare to stay for long. After glancing at Zhao Yuan, she bowed and slowly withdrew. "Brother Zhao, why did Princess Chao come to see me?" After Chao Ying left, Zhang Yan turned around and asked Zhao Yuan the reason. Zhao Yuan smiled bitterly. In recent years, Chao Ying has been pestered by a lower house disciple of the North Star sect. He said that he wanted to take her as a concubine and teach her the Xianmen Dao. Her brothers also seemed to have the same intention, so she came to seek protection. If senior brother Zhang is willing to be her consecrator, this person will definitely not dare to make things difficult for her. He didn't dare to deceive Zhang Yan about the inside story. Moreover, Zhang Yan would know about these things sooner or later. It was better to say it now than later. Moreover, the North Star sect wasn't a big sect. Compared to the Yutsang sect, it couldn't even be considered a second-rate sect. This matter should only benefit Zhang Yan. In fact, Chao Ying regarded Zhang Yan as a consecrator not only for these reasons. She was especially optimistic about Zhang Yan's bright future. Moreover, Zhang Yan had just become an inner disciple and wasn't from a Xianmen family. His appetite wouldn't be very big. Sure enough, as soon as Zhang Yan heard the name of the North Star sect, he stopped asking and said, "Since senior brother Zhao has come forward, I will accept this matter." Zhao Yuan was overjoyed. He stood up and cupped his hands towards Zhang Yan. "Thank you, senior brother." "No need to be so polite, senior brother Zhao." The two chatted a little more. Zhao Yuan stood up and said goodbye. He went back in high spirits. The snake spirit Luo Shao poked his head out of the cauldron. He looked as if he had expected this. "How about it? As an inner disciple of the Yutsang sect, you only need to say a word and you can drive thousands of people to serve you. When you enter the upper house, you can even order the ruler of a city or a country around. How powerful is that?" It's a pity that the demon race of the three pools, even with millions of aquatic monsters, can only defend one place. We are far inferior to your big sections. Zhang Yan previously valued the status of an inner disciple only to improve his cultivation. Now that he saw it, he seemed to have neglected other aspects. He couldn't help but nod. What Brother Luo said is right. Luo Xiao chuckled. When you get the divine sand, you can exchange it with some of the brothers from the aristocratic families for some medicinal herbs. Medicinal herbs? Zhang Yan looked at Luo Xiao again and said in a low voice, Brother Luo, you know alchemy? Luo Xiao proudly said, of course. Although I can't refine top-grade medicinal pills, I can easily refine some medicinal pills for healing and nourishing injuries. Since Brother Luo said so, then the vessel used for alchemy must be this bronze cauldron of mine? Zhang Yan saw through Luo Xiao's thoughts at a glance. However, Luo Xiao didn't feel embarrassed at all. Of course, this big cauldron of yours is also a top-grade magic tool. However, it's not made of bronze. It's made of top-grade dragon merchant star sand. It's just that the cultivator who made this cauldron was quite skilled. If I hadn't been steamed by you once, I wouldn't have noticed the change in the cauldron's qi. I guess the person who gave you this cauldron didn't know the true origin of this cauldron. TSK, it's really a waste of a treasure to use such a cauldron to cook food. Alchemy is the right thing to do. Zhang Yan was shocked. Dragon merchant star sand? This was something that he had only heard of in the legends. Although he did not know how much it was worth, he knew that it was a top-grade material needed for refining weapons. To use it to forge such a big cauldron, how much dragon merchant star sand would be used? Perhaps only the ancient cultivators would be able to spend so much money, right? Luo Xiao glanced at Zhang Yan and said, you don't have to feel bad about it. Since I can refine healing pills, I can also give you many benefits. The pills you need to open your meridians aren't few. I can help you refine them. Seeing that Luo Xiao seemed to be afraid that he wouldn't be willing, so she hurriedly promised him benefits, Zhang Yan couldn't help but laugh. He said, I definitely don't have such intentions. This cauldron is temporarily useless to me. If Brother Luo needs it, feel free to use it first. From his perspective, Luo Xiao was more important to him. Opening his meridians was the most crucial step, so he had to be extremely careful. However, he didn't have a master to guide him. Although he could rely on the remnant jade for cultivation techniques, he didn't know some of the things he needed to avoid and the things he needed to use. Although Luo Xiao in front of him wasn't a human cultivator, she was still a mystic light stage snake Yao. She was experienced and knowledgeable, so it was more than enough for her to guide a small cultivator who hadn't even opened his meridians. Zhang Yan took the opportunity to ask about things he didn't understand. He didn't know why, but Luo Xiao didn't refuse any of Zhang Yan's questions. She answered them all in detail. We Yao cultivate. After we transform, we can naturally practice superior techniques. There's no need to open our meridians. Luo Xiao's body was coiled on the handle of the cauldron. She only raised her snake head and talked non-stop. However, I also know that you human cultivators cultivate. The opened meridians are divided into upper, middle, and lower grades. This is related to the method of opening meridians and the jade elixir flower pond. If you want to open your meridians, you should find a good jade elixir flower pond. The jade elixir flower pond is divided into 6 grades. Only with a good method and a first-grade jade elixir flower pond will you be able to open a high-grade meridian. The jade elixir flower pond was formed by the heaven and earth. It was the spiritual milk nurtured by the underground cave stone embryo and then fused with the essence of the earth veins to form a pond. When opening meridians, it could nourish the meridians of the body and replenish the vitality. It was extremely important to cultivators at this step. Of course, there weren't that many jade elixir flower ponds in the world. However, the stone embryo in the pond was the key. Therefore, the Xianmen aristocratic families would spend hundreds or even thousands of years to nurture the stone embryo and create their own jade elixir flower pond. From this point, one could see the depth of the aristocratic family's heritage. And the disciples of the master-disciple lineage could only rely on the jade elixir flower pond found by their seniors and masters to open their meridians. If there wasn't one, then they could only borrow the jade elixir flower pond of the Xianmen aristocratic families and be forced to be controlled by others. Zhang Yan knew that there would definitely be a jade elixir flower pond in the lower courtyard. However, the master would definitely not let him use it. Therefore, he had to think of another way. Since fellow Luo said that the Yao don't need to open meridians, then is there a jade elixir flower pond in the 3 pools? Luo Xiao giggled. There is, but wouldn't it be better for us demons to take it and then sell it to you human cultivators? Therefore, they all have owners. It's absolutely impossible to take it away for free. Zhang Yan shook his head. Buying a jade elixir flower pond in the 3 pools of Lake Demon's territory. Not to mention that he didn't have the financial resources, even if he did, he wouldn't have the life to enjoy it. At this time, he thought of another rumor and asked tentatively, I heard that in ancient times, cultivators didn't need a jade elixir flower pond to open their meridians. Fellow Luo, do you know why? You even know this. You weren't bragging when you said that you read all the Taoist books. Luo Xiao was slightly surprised. It rolled its eyes and shook its head. This method uses the spiritual liquid in the spirit shell to replace the jade elixir flower pond. I'm afraid fellow Zhang won't be willing. When Zhang Yan heard this, he understood. However, this method wasn't a matter of whether he was willing or not. Even if he had a shell field, it would still be impossible. This was because only 1 out of 100 spirit shells would contain spiritual liquid. Even if there was jade elixir, it would only be 1 or 2 drops. He made a rough calculation. Just to gather a jar of spiritual liquid, the number of spirit shells needed would be at least 300 to 400 million. This was simply an astronomical figure. No matter how extravagant a sect was, they wouldn't be able to withstand such a torment, let alone him. However, to say that ancient cultivators used this method to open their meridians, he definitely wouldn't believe it. If that was the case, most of the spirit shells in the world would have already been dug clean. How could they still be able to survive until now? Therefore, there must be another method. Luo Xiao definitely wasn't telling the truth. He smiled faintly and didn't deny it. Luo Xiao was originally waiting to see Zhang Yan's dejected expression. However, seeing that his words didn't scare Zhang Yan, he couldn't help but feel a little bored. He snorted and said, I'll just tell you. In the place where spirit shells grow, there must be an empty cave 1,000 feet below where the king of the shell resides. If you can absorb the true dew from within, even if it's a low-grade meridian opening method, you can still form a high-grade meridian in the end. He glanced at Zhang Yan and added, I heard that this method has always been used by the direct disciples of the various sections. Zhang Yan nodded and said, since fellow Luo told me this method, you must have some other request. I hope you can tell me as well. Luo Xiao stared at Zhang Yan's eyes and said in a deep voice, I can bring you there. I can also give you all the spirit shells in the shell field. However, you have to swear an oath. After opening my meridians, you have to release me from the blood essence oath and return me my freedom. Chapter 24. The fire under the dragon merchant's star cauldron was burning. Seeing that the fire was getting weaker, Zhang Yan, who was sitting on the cattail hassock, picked up a few sticks of firewood and placed them under the cauldron. After Princess Linya gave him the 5 elements divine sand, he went to Ai Zhongwen to exchange for a lot of herbs. A few days later, Luo Xiao opened the cauldron to refine medicine. Within 10 days, he had refined no less than 1,000 elixirs and gave them all to him. Luo Xiao sorted out the remaining herbs and threw them into the cauldron. Finally, he jumped into the cauldron and told Zhang Yan to cover the cauldron. Every day, he would use the fire to refine medicine. Every 7 days, he would open the cauldron. Luo Xiao did not dare to try it at first, but this dragon merchant's star cauldron was something that could only be found by luck. As long as the method was stable, he could rely on the power of the cauldron to boil the medicine. The medicine would enter the internal organs, wrap up the primordial qi, wash away the impurities, and activate the vitality. According to Luo Xiao's instructions, Zhang Yan first used a small fire to boil the medicine. Every 7 days, he would open the cauldron and change the herbs. Every time, a layer of dead skin would be shed from Luo Xiao's body. At the same time, he had to pour out a whole cauldron of black residue. Every time he refined, Luo Xiao's qi dynamic would become stronger. This was an eye-opener for Zhang Yan. Now, the third 7 days had passed. According to Luo Xiao, he needed to use a fierce fire to attack the cauldron. However, the day of opening the cauldron was right in front of him, but there was no movement in the cauldron. He could not identify the faint qi dynamic either. He did not know if it was because the cauldron was overcooked or it was not fully refined. Without Luo Xiao's instructions, Zhang Yan did not dare to open the cauldron. He only cared about his own cultivation. In this 1 month, he practiced his qi day and night and swallowed a large number of elixirs. These days, the elixirs he ate every day were equivalent to the total amount he had taken in the past. As he concentrated on his training, the Yuanjin qi in his body became more and more condensed. His qi, which was originally as lively as an ape, was now as tame as a crouching bull and as stable as a black tortoise. It lay peacefully in the orifice of his dan. The state of Yuanqing entering Zhen gradually stabilized. At this moment, he felt that he could already proceed to the next step of the incantation. He picked up the record of Mystic Essence Internal Meditation. Although he had read this book for a long time, he still read it carefully again. Then, he stretched out his hand and grabbed the broken jade in his sleeve. His consciousness sank into the doppelganger. As his cultivation increased, the jade seemed to have become somewhat different from before. Originally, the jade was misty, and it was impossible to distinguish up, down, left, and right. It was as if there was nothing else in the world except oneself. When the doppelganger walked in the jade, it was also illusory, swaying unsteadily. But now, he felt as if he was in a vast space, and there was a difference between up and down. Zhang Yan looked up. Above him was an illusory cloud of clear air, but below his feet was thick and turbid as if he was stepping on solid ground. If he looked at it according to the evolution of Hongmeng, at the beginning, the jade could be described as chaos like a chicken, the doppelganger in it. Now, it could be described as clear air rising, turbid air falling, yin and yang divided into two, heaven and earth beginning to settle. Originally, when his consciousness entered the jade, he could still feel that it was only a fake doppelganger. But at this moment, when his consciousness occupied the jade, all his thoughts and feelings were as clear as real, and he could not distinguish the inside from the outside at all. Zhang Yan seemed to have understood something. It seemed that because his cultivation increased, the situation in the jade changed, and the doppelganger became more and more real. As he pondered, he continued to walk in the broken jade. However, the space here was incomparably vast, and there seemed to be no end to it. He thought to himself, it seemed that the secret of this broken jade was far more than what he saw. But the only thing that mattered was to increase his own cultivation. At this moment, he was not in the mood to study it deeply. The doppelganger sat on the ground, took a posture of 5 hearts facing the sky, and began to silently circulate the mental cultivation method on the wonderful record. According to the incantation, the person who cultivated needed to raise 1 qi dynamic, then split it into 2, 2 into 4, and separately circulate it into the 4 meridians. These 4 qi dynamics all had different methods to circulate, and there could not be the slightest deviation. Although Zhang Yan was mentally prepared, the difficulty at this moment was far beyond his imagination. He tried his best to control it, and barely managed to take the first step. However, when he reached the second step, his mind was careless, and the qi dynamic immediately became chaotic, and randomly scattered to various parts of his body. His heart suddenly shook, and his consciousness returned to the main body. When he looked back, he found that the doppelganger had been seriously injured by the qi dynamic and had fallen to the ground. If the main body was cultivating at this moment, it was likely that his foundation would have been injured. He shook his head, took a deep breath, and his consciousness entered the jade again. As his thoughts changed, the doppelganger that had fallen to the ground with serious injuries stood up again. Just by practicing the first part of the incantation, he had tried all kinds of ways to die with broken meridians, reversed flow of Jinqi, and backlash of internal organs no less than 150 times. It could be imagined how abnormal this incantation was. Zhang Yan shook his head. There was almost no shortcut to this kind of multitasking, and he could only rely on repeated attempts to increase his proficiency. Moreover, because every death was an incomparably real experience, he could not help but secretly laugh at himself. He estimated that after he finished practicing this Taoist incantation, he would be able to achieve the level of a master in qi deviation. He believed that those cultivators who had never come into contact with this Taoist book, if they did not have the protection of their masters, they would most likely die on the spot. It was no wonder that Luo Xiao said that this book would easily attract the jealousy of the heavens. If anyone could master this book without relying on any external objects and only relying on their own talent and comprehension, not only would the heavens not let them go, if it was possible, Zhang Yan also wanted to throw a lightning bolt and strike that person to death. He used more than a month to hone his control of qi, which was almost equivalent to his doppelganger in the jade for 10 months, and only then did he become familiar with the entire set of qi circulation. Up until now, he did not know how many times his doppelganger had died. Fortunately, he had a strong will. If it was someone else, they would probably go crazy from the boring qi circulation. But on the other hand, it was not that Zhang Yan did not gain anything from this cultivation. At least this book almost included all the methods and techniques of qi circulation in the current cultivation. He believed that at this moment, there was almost no one in the same cultivation who could compare to him in terms of qi circulation control. But in this more than a month, there was no movement from Luo Xiao in the treasure cauldron. Could it be that he was really dead? Zhang Yan stood up and was about to go and find out when he suddenly heard a voice in his ear. "Is Zhang Yan here? Come out and talk." He could not help but shiver. He took 2 steps out of the cave residence and saw a handsome cultivator in white standing in the air in front of the plank road. "Ning Chongxian." Zhang Yan calmly cupped his hands and said, "Senior brother Ning." He quickly calculated in his mind. He did not know why Ning Chongxian came here to find him. Could it be that he had found out about Luo Xiao? Impossible. If that was the case, he would have rushed in long ago. Ning Chongxian glanced at him, suddenly stepped forward and put his hand on his shoulder. "It's not convenient to talk here, follow me." Zhang Yan only felt his vision blurred. When he saw the surrounding scenery again, he had already appeared at the top of a lonely peak, and under his feet was a bottomless abyss. His body just swayed slightly, and he adjusted from the initial discomfort and stood firmly again. Ning Chongxian nodded and praised, "Very good, a cultivator should reject external things and only keep one's true self. You need to know that all kinds of obstacles are born from the heart. If the heart is unstable, the spirit will not be born." His current look was very different from the day he left, and there seemed to be a hint of appreciation in his eyes. Zhang Yan did not know what he was playing at. "I have searched back and forth in this mountain for 2 months, but I still haven't found any trace of the snake demon. I think it is either seriously injured and dead, or hiding somewhere. But I will return to the mountain gate soon and have no time to look for it. You are the only cultivator on this peak. When I leave, it may come out to harm you. So I will give you something that will definitely save your life." Ning Chongxian pointed with his finger, and a jade light flew into Zhang Yan's sleeve. In a hurry, he could not see what it was. "Go, remember to keep your heart. If there is fate in the future, I will introduce you to an immortal master." Ning Chongxian stretched out his hand and pushed. Zhang Yan's body slightly swayed, but he did not feel anything. When he looked up, it turned out that he had returned to the foot of the stargazing peak. But at this moment, he did not know that shortly after he was taken away by Ning Chongxian, a figure came to the door of his cave residence and looked inside. Suddenly, his face lit up with joy, and he dashed in. Chapter 25. During the 2 months that Zhang Yan was cultivating, there were some changes on Mount Kanggu. Zheng Sun returned to the Zheng family and successfully opened his meridians. The meridian he condensed was of the lower grade and his future was limitless. He had stepped onto the path of immortality and would soon head to the upper house to cultivate more advanced techniques. He no longer had any attachment to the lower house. The lower house was also in an uproar. With Zheng Sun's departure, there was an empty spot for the inner disciple position. Some nominal disciples from aristocratic families were running around for the spot. If nothing went wrong, Lin Yuan would be the new eldest disciple of the lower house. The door to his residence was almost trampled by the people. As Lin Yuan's younger brother, Lin Tong also tried his best to get a position in the lower house. However, Lin Yuan ignored him. Although the position of the eldest disciple was right in front of him, it was not done yet. Moreover, Shi Shoujing had long set her eyes on Ai Zhongwen. Moreover, Ai Zhongwen had a lot of connections in the sect. If nothing went wrong, Ai Zhongwen would be the inner disciple. Although there was a rift between Lin Yuan and Ai Zhongwen because of Zhang Yan, Ai Zhongwen was from the Ai clan of Anfeng after all. It was not convenient for him to suppress him. When Lin Tong saw that he couldn't get through Lin Yuan's connections, and he was on good terms with Chen Lan, he decided to seek help from the latter. However, for some unknown reason, Chen Lan's attitude was also ambiguous, and she refused to stand up for him. She only mentioned that she was lacking an alchemy artifact. Lin Tong was confused. Where did he get a magic tool for alchemy? After asking around, he found out that Chen Lan seemed to like the turbid suppression cauldron that Master Shi Shoujing had given to Zhang Yan. Lin Tong could not help but think, I heard that Zhang Yan is on good terms with Ai Zhongwen. Why don't I ask him to persuade Zhang Yan to hand over the cauldron? I'll give him some benefits. He did not expect that he would be scolded by Ai Zhongwen the moment he opened his mouth. Lin Tong could not help but swear, I'll definitely teach you a lesson after I become the inner disciple. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't convince Zhang Yan to hand over the cauldron. In the end, he made up his mind and said, I might as well steal that cauldron. He knew that Zhang Yan was an expert in martial arts, so he did not dare to force his way in. However, he also found out that Zhang Yan was the only one in the cave, and there were no servants serving him. He decided to steal the cauldron when Zhang Yan was not around, and then bury it on the mountain. When night fell, he would dig it up and give it to Chen Lan. Now that senior brother Chen has this cauldron, he will definitely speak up for me. Lin Yuan secretly made up his mind and wandered around the stargazing peak day and night, watching from afar, but Zhang Yan seemed to never go out, only blindly cultivating behind closed doors. He suffered for more than 2 months, and when he was almost desperate, he found that Zhang Yan was taken away by a white-robed cultivator. He was immediately overjoyed and refused to miss the opportunity. He hurried forward and looked inside the cave mansion, and sure enough, there was no trace of anyone. He rushed towards the big cauldron. But he heard a cold shout from his side, Who are you? Lin Tong was shocked and looked back, only to see a charming woman standing there. The woman's eyebrows looked like they had been delicately drawn with a brush, and beneath them was a pair of enchanting eyes. Her figure was curvaceous, and her neck revealed a large area of skin that was as delicate as suet white jade. Just one look at her would make one's blood boil. Lin Tong was startled, and said, You are Zhang Yan's maidservant. TSK, you are a little beauty, why not follow me? Hearing this, the woman raised her thin eyebrows, and a murderous look flashed in her beautiful eyes. She shouted, You are courting death. Zhang Yan walked up the mountain path from the bottom of the mountain, thinking about Ning Chongshuan's intention. Ning Chongshuan's last sentence showed that he was a disciple of the master and disciple lineage, which meant that the other party should have discovered his value, so he was trying to rope him in. But this was not good news, because it meant that the struggle in the upper house was more intense than he imagined. But it was still too early to think about this, and everything had to wait until he opened his meridians. After returning to the immortal's cave, he stepped through the door and saw a charming woman looking at him affectionately. As soon as she saw Zhang Yan come in, she immediately stepped forward and timidly pulled on Zhang Yan's sleeve, sobbing, "I've been looking for young master for so many years, but today I finally found young master." Zhang Yan glanced at her, and walked in expressionlessly. The woman rolled her eyes, and hugged him from behind, a pair of plump breasts leaning against his back, and said sadly, "Have you forgotten me, young master Zhang?" Zhang Yan's expression did not change, and said, "Why do you have to be like this, brother Luo? You and I see each other every day, and we share a room every day, how can I not recognize you?" The woman was startled, and her face immediately turned red. She hurriedly let go of his hand, and jumped to the side. She bit her lower lip, and stomped her feet, and said angrily, "Damn, I forgot that you, a little thief, can identify aura." Then she became dissatisfied, and said, "Hey, who shares a room with a little thief like you every day, don't spoil my innocence for no reason." Zhang Yan shook his head, and cupped his hands, saying, "Brother Luo, you are full of grievances, congratulations." It was obviously congratulatory words, but his tone was flat, and it sounded insincere. Luo Xiao couldn't help but glare at him hatefully, and said unhappily, "I can only transform for the time being, my cultivation still needs to recover slowly." Zhang Yan took large strides inside, and couldn't help but look surprised, because he found that the inside of the cave residence had changed. Not only were the walls as clean as a mirror, the ground was also spotless, and even the firewood and charcoal that were originally numerous had been moved out. Everything was placed in separate rows, and the previous messy appearance was different. Luo Xiao said proudly, "Look at you, you don't even know how to clean the cave residence." It was not that Zhang Yan didn't like cleanliness, but the cave residence was spacious, and he didn't even have time to cultivate, so where would he find the time to clean it? Moreover, during the end of the world, his life could be in danger at any time, and he was in a precarious situation. Having a safe place to stay was also extravagant, so he didn't really care about the environment around him. He only cleaned up the areas that he usually lived in as much as possible. However, he shook his head and said, "I don't think it's clean enough." "How is it not clean?" Luo Xiao raised her eyebrows, and she was immediately unconvinced. Zhang Yan pointed at the treasure cauldron, and said in a deep voice, "Who's in the cauldron?" Just when Lin Tong was scheming to steal the cauldron, he did not expect the situation on Azure Parasol Mountain to change unexpectedly. What shocked everyone was that the upper house actually sent another person to replace Jing Sun's position. Lin Yuan was happy for nothing in the end, and only then did he find out that Jing Sun had gone to the upper house not only to take over his clansman's legacy, but also to make room for him so that he could secure the position of the lower house's first disciple. Even so, the crowd did not lose their composure. When the person was escorted to the main hall by the crowd, they realized that the person who had become the first disciple of the lower house in the blink of an eye was only a boy of 14 or 15 years old. The boy's eyes were bright, and his face was delicate. Although he tried his best to look mature, his age was still there, and the disciples felt indescribably strange and uncomfortable. "Where did this kid come from?" Someone below whispered to each other. "I heard that he's the son of the Du clan." Someone added in a low voice, "I heard that he's only 15 years old this year." When he was 9, he had already achieved nascent soul enlightenment, and he only waited for 6 years to condense a high-grade pulse. Rumor has it that his father is an elder of the upper house, and his mother is the famous beauty of the Du clan in Hengnan, Du Luo. The crowd's hearts trembled. Putting aside the position of an elder in the upper house, the Du clan's influence was also greater than the 3 major sections. It was no wonder that the 3 lower house chief mentors did not say anything about this matter, and tacitly agreed to it. At that moment, the people who were prepared to make a fuss became silent. The boy glanced at the disciples present, and with his hands behind his back, he raised his head and puffed out his chest, and said in an old-fashioned manner, "My name is Du, and I'm here today to be your first disciple." The disciples lowered their eyes and did not say anything. Du's little face showed slight dissatisfaction. Seeing this, a person who looked like a steward at the side quickly stood up and said, "Disciples, why aren't you paying your respects to the first disciple of the lower house?" Lin Yuan could not help but snort heavily, and the rest of the people also ignored him. "We're all from the Xianmen aristocratic families, and we admit that your Du clan is powerful, but a mere servant dares to order us around? Isn't he looking down on us a little too much?" Du also knew that it was not good to be too forceful, and quickly signaled the steward with his eyes to leave. He coughed, and said, "Are all the disciples here today?" As soon as he said this, someone stood up and said, in reply to first disciple, "There's still one disciple who hasn't arrived today." The crowd looked over, and it turned out to be Zhen Luan. This person was also one of the 5 disciples whose cultivation was nascent soul enlightenment. Although he knew that the Zhen clan and the Du clan had a close relationship, the way he addressed him as first disciple was a little too frank. "Oh, don't the lower house have 28 disciples? Senior disciple Zheng Sun has left, isn't the number just right?" Du pretended to be doubtful as he looked around. Zhen Luan continued, "The lower house guru Shi Shoujing has accepted a new disciple, his name is Zhang Yan, so the lower house originally has 29 disciples. Surnamed Zhang. Do you know which Zhang clan he is from? This person is not from an aristocratic family." Du frowned, and said angrily, "He is not from an aristocratic family, how can he enter my lower house?" Zhen Luan replied, "This person single-handedly defeated the Guangyuan sect at the spell gathering, so the guru made an exception and accepted him as a disciple." Lin Yuan watched the two of them as if they were putting on a show, and the corner of his mouth revealed a slight sneer. "Do you really think that I can't see through your tricks?" Du knew that he was still young, and could not convince the crowd. Coming to the upper house, he first had to establish his authority. Originally, he wanted to make an example out of Lin Yuan, but this person's background was not simple, and he was not easy to deal with. The other disciples were all from aristocratic families, and it was not that they were not powerful enough, but that they could not find a reason to intimidate the crowd. However, he had already investigated beforehand, and it just so happened that one of the new disciples was not from an aristocratic family, and had no foundation in the sect, so it was suitable for him to make an example out of him. Du asked knowingly, "Today I gathered all the disciples, why didn't Zhang Yan come to pay his respects?" Zhen Luan said, "This Zhang Yan has always been unruly, and when senior disciple Zheng was around, he was already disobedient. Even senior disciple Lin couldn't do anything about him, and I think that senior disciple Lin might not even care about him." Hearing this, Lin Yuan's eyes flashed with a hint of anger. Du glanced at Lin Yuan, and said loudly, "Senior disciple Zheng can't control him, and senior disciple Lin can't control him, but I can. Someone, bring me my ruler." Immediately, a man who looked like a strong man walked out, and respectfully brought a sparkling white jade ruler in front of Du. This was a magical weapon given to him by Du's mother, Du Luo, and it was called the discipline ruler. Once it was used, anyone below the clear qi stage, no matter what cultivation level they had, would immediately be knocked to the ground, unable to move their qi, unable to come out, just like a disabled person. After 3 consecutive strikes, they would immediately die. Du took the ruler, and handed it over to the steward beside him, and said coldly, "Steward Hao, go and arrest Zhang Yan, if he disobeys, beat him to death." Chapter 26. Steward Hao had already inquired about Zhang Yan's residence beforehand. After receiving the order, he rushed to Stargazing Peak with 2 attendants. He had been in the Du family for a long time and had also practiced qi to seek Tao. It was just that he was limited by his aptitude and could not open his meridians. However, it was not a problem for him to drive a talisman. He was originally a servant in the Du family. This time, he followed young Master Du to the lower house of the Yingzang sect. He finally felt that there was a day where he could make a name for himself. Now that he had the opportunity to personally detain a new disciple, he could not help but feel proud. He walked all the way to the entrance of Zhang Yan's abode of Immortals Cave. Without announcing anyone, he pushed the door open and walked inside. He deliberately avoided looking at the people inside the abode of Immortals Cave and pretended to ask, "Where is Zhang Yan?" Zhang Yan was originally about to deal with Lin Tong, who was stuffed into the cauldron by Luo Xiao. Suddenly, he saw Steward Hao barge in as if there was no one else around. His expression immediately turned cold and said, "Who are you?" Steward Hao put his hands behind his back and said with his head held high, "Zhang Yan, I am the steward of the lower house. Today, the head disciple of the lower house, Du, has gathered all the disciples to the side hall for a discussion. Everyone is going, why are you the only one not going? I am here on young master's order to take you for questioning. Why are you not kneeling and admitting your crimes? Head disciple of the lower house. Du? Zhang Yan was slightly puzzled and immediately became alert. Did the situation in the lower house change? He looked at the other's posture and suddenly realized something. He sneered, "Let's not talk about whether you are guilty or not. I am a new disciple. You are just a servant, how dare you arrest me? Cut the crap. Are you going to tie your hands or wait for me to take them?" Although Steward Hao had a talisman in his hand, Zhang Yan had a fierce reputation. Moreover, his mana and cultivation were far above his. Coupled with Zhang Yan's imposing figure, he was actually nervous. Just as Steward Hao raised the restraint ruler, Zhang Yan's body suddenly tensed up. His hair stood on end as a sense of extreme danger emanated from the ruler. Just from the immense aura emanating from it, Zhang Yan could tell that it was an extremely powerful magic tool. Zhang Yan looked solemn. He quietly put his hand into his sleeve and grasped something. It was a protective item given to him by Ning Chongxian. He didn't know how useful it was. When Steward Hao saw that Zhang Yan was indeed unwilling to submit, he thought to himself, "You're the one who's looking for death, so you can't blame me." He raised the restraining ruler and was about to release it to hit Zhang Yan, but before he could make a move, his hands suddenly became empty. The next moment, he was dumbfounded to see that a beautiful woman was playing with the ruler in her hands with great interest. Steward Hao was in a daze for a long time before he came back to his senses. He couldn't help but shout, "Quickly return my transcendent artifact." Luo Xiao spat and said disdainfully, "How dare you pretend to be a transcendent artifact with this kind of crude refinement?" Steward Hao was so angry that he was about to go crazy. He said, "You lowly servant, I'm the steward of the Du clan. Do you know that the Du clan, the Du?" Zhang Yan shook his head. He didn't want to waste time with him. He took 2 steps forward, grabbed his arm, and threw him out. Outside the cave was a plank road. Steward Hao was instantly scared out of his wits. Fortunately, Zhang Yan didn't use too much strength. In a fluster, Steward Hao managed to hold onto the plank road firmly. Otherwise, he might have fallen to pieces. Seeing that the situation was not good, the 2 attendants quickly pulled him up. Steward Hao had suffered. How could he dare to stay here any longer? He immediately ran back in a panic. Zhang Yan's face darkened. Before he went into seclusion, he heard from Ai Zhongwen that Jing Sun had returned to the clan to open his meridians. Now that he thought about it, this Du who claimed to be the first disciple of the lower house must have taken over Jing Sun's original position. He could more or less guess what this Du was planning. It seemed that it was not appropriate to not have the strength or identity to intimidate everyone. Ning Chongxian had given him something, so he might have to borrow it today. Luo Xiao picked up the prudential ruler and played with it a few times. Suddenly, she rolled her eyes and giggled. She seemed to have thought of some wicked idea. She picked up Lin Tong, who was unconscious in the cauldron, and stuffed the ruler into Lin Tong's sleeve. Zhang Yan looked at her and said, "What are you doing?" Luo Xiao clapped her hands and said proudly, if I'm not wrong, this ruler must be a pair. Just sit back and watch the show. You waited in the main hall for 2 hours. Just as he was getting impatient, a disheveled steward Hao came back. As soon as he entered the main hall, he cried out, young master, please calm your anger. This old servant was careless and made a mistake, causing the magic weapon to be taken away by Zhang Yan. I beg the young master to punish me. Du opened his mouth and suddenly became furious. He pointed at Steward Hao and cursed, nonsense, Zhang Yan is just an essence-building cultivator. My magic weapon can be knocked over by a cultivator at the clear chi stage. How could it be taken away by him? Steward Hao said with a sullen face, although the magic treasure is good, before this old servant could use it, it was taken by Zhang Yan. He originally wanted to say that it was taken by a servant girl, but when the words reached the tip of his tongue, he was afraid of losing face, so he immediately changed his words. Du secretly cursed him as a waste. This steward Hao was also brought by him from the Du clan. He did not want him to be like this. The more he looked at him, the more annoyed he felt. His face sank as he said, I lost my magic weapon, what use do you have? Steward Hao's body trembled. He was familiar with Du's temperament, so he knew what he wanted to do. He immediately called out, young master, spare. He had not even finished speaking when a white light flashed in the main hall. Kacha, a sound was heard. His head had already cracked open, and he died on the spot. Du stretched out his hand and gently beckoned. A fluorescent and translucent jade ruler that was as thin as a cicada's wing flew back into his palm. Lin Yuan's eyelids twitched as he looked at the scene from the side. This Du actually had more than one magic weapon in his hands. Du frowned as he tried to pinch the magic weapon back and forth a few times. But he did not get a response from the magic weapon. He thought that the magic weapon was being suppressed by someone else, and could not escape. A person could die, but a magic weapon could never be lost. He sneered and said, Zhang Yan, do you really think that my magic weapon is so easy to take? At the moment, the ruler in his hand was called the fixed ruler. It was a pair with the constrained ruler. The main ruler and the auxiliary ruler were mutually attracted to each other. Du muttered a spell in his heart and said, go. A white light flew out of his hand and instantly passed through the main hall. A moment later, 2 white lights flew back into the main hall at the same time and steadily landed in his hand. It was the pair of jade rulers. He silently checked in his heart and knew that the fixed ruler had already taken someone's life. The corner of his mouth slightly curled up. He turned around and pointed to the 2 strong men beside him and said, you two, go and bring back Zhang Yan's corpse. The 2 strong men acknowledged and left the main hall. Du looked around and said slowly, junior brothers, please wait for a moment. Zhang Yan was so arrogant. As the eldest disciple of the lower house, I will naturally give you an explanation. All 28 of them, including Lin Yuan, looked down and didn't say a word. Du did not care. When he brought back Zhang Yan's corpse, these people would naturally know what he was up to. The 2 strong men moved very quickly. About an hour later, they returned to recover their lives. Du could not hold back and asked anxiously, where is Zhang Yan? The strong man replied, Zhang Yan is outside the main hall. Du nodded with satisfaction and said, come, bring the corpse here. The strong man hesitated for a moment and then waved his hand. 2 long men carried a bloody corpse. This person's head was smashed and his face was blurred. The disciples secretly shook their heads. Although they all looked down on Zhang Yan's background, they also thought that Zhang Yan could be considered an outstanding person. What he did on the Earth Gate was also admirable. They did not expect that he would die in the hands of a young man today. It could be said that he was unlucky. Du glanced at the crowd and saw that there seemed to be fear in their eyes. He could not help but feel proud. He pointed at the corpse and pretended to ask, this is Zhang Yan? Originally, he did not expect anyone to answer this question. The strong man hesitated and said, This person seems to be Zhang Yan, seems to be Zhang Yan? Diyu turned his head and suddenly stared at the strong man. The strong man was shocked. He was also present when Steward Hao was beaten to death. He could not help but stutter. There was someone waiting outside the door. He said that he was also Zhang Yan. Diyu was furious. He pointed at the corpse and said, That person is Zhang Yan. This person is also Zhang Yan. How many Zhang Yans are there in the lower house? A clear voice came from outside. The person who was beaten to death is Brother Lin Yuan's junior brother, Lin Tong. What? Lin Yuan was startled and immediately cried out, Zhang Yan? Why are you? A tall figure walked into the main hall under everyone's gaze. Who else could it be but Zhang Yan? Lin Yuan's heart skipped a beat. Could the person who was beaten to death really be Lin Tong? Zhang Yan walked into the main hall and stood still. His expression was calm. He first cupped his hands to everyone and then said, Just now, I was chatting happily with Brother Lin in the cave. Suddenly, an evil servant came out and said that he wanted to capture me. Brother Lin was furious and argued with the evil servant. Who knew that the evil servant wanted to injure you? So Brother Lin took the jade ruler from the person's hand and kept it in his bosom. He said that he would return it to the owner of the treasure in the future. Who knew that not long after the evil servant left, another ruler suddenly flew out and hit Brother Lin's head on the spot, causing him to die a violent death. He sighed and said with a sigh, I have always been on good terms with Brother Lin and admire his character. Who would have thought that he would die in the hands of a vile person today? What a pity. Lin Yuan's expression was strange. Of course, he knew his younger brother Lin Tong's temperament. What Zhang Yan said was most likely not true. But now, he could only tacitly agree with Zhang Yan's statement. Could he say that Lin Tong saw the treasure and was seeking his own death? No matter what, Lin Tong was his younger brother. Now that he was killed for no reason, even if it was for his own face, he had to come out and defend Zhang Yan's words. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel disgusted. You are Zhang Yan. Diyu's 2 consecutive attacks had failed, causing him to lose a lot of face in front of his fellow disciples. At this moment, he was even mocked by Zhang Yan as a vile person. He was already mad with anger. His eyes were red as he looked at Zhang Yan. Suddenly, he shouted and 2 white lights flew out from his hands towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed. Seeing the 2 rulers flying down from above, he also waved his hand, and a streak of green light flew out from his sleeve. Ka suddenly resounded in the air, as if 2 pieces of metal were breaking. The 2 jade rulers that were originally shining with a bright white light unexpectedly fell to the ground. Seeing this, Lin Yuan couldn't help but cry out, Spirit tool. All the disciples were shocked. This was a spirit tool that had spirituality and could be moved at will. Compared to Diyu's magic tools that still needed to be activated, it was many times better. Today, Diyu continuously took out magic tools to hit people, which already made everyone sigh at the Du family's generosity. They didn't expect that Zhang Yan actually had a spirit tool on him. What was this Zhang Yan's background? Ai Zhongwen said that this person's background was extraordinary. Could it be that he was really a disciple that was deliberately hidden and cultivated by some aristocratic family? For a moment, everyone looked at Zhang Yan with a complicated gaze. Chapter 27. When the 2 jade rulers fell to the ground, they had already lost their luster. It was obvious that they were heavily injured. Diyu's youthful face was slightly twisted. He reached out his hand and touched the black ink stone in his sleeve. He thought, even if I have to endure mother's scolding, I will kill this Zhang Yan here today. Stop. Just as he was about to make a move, he suddenly heard a loud shout. A middle-aged man wearing a blue robe and a mixed essence crown walked in. He was still outside the hall when he took a step forward, but when he took a step forward, everyone's vision blurred. He was already next to Du Yu and grabbed his wrist, stopping his next move. So close, so close. This person is obviously an expert at the third level of the mystic light realm. That's why he can control the mystic light and shrink the ground within a few miles. Lin Yuan was knowledgeable, and he could tell how powerful this middle-aged man was with one glance. When do you saw the person? He said in surprise, Uncle Bo. The middle-aged man ignored Du Yu and turned to Zhang Yan. He said in a pleasant tone, Zhang Yan, today's matter has nothing to do with you. It's not your fault. You can leave now. Du Yu opened his mouth, but he was stopped by the middle-aged man's stern gaze. He had no choice but to endure it. He could only stare at Zhang Yan with eyes full of murderous intent. Zhang Yan's expression became serious. This middle-aged man gave him an extremely strong pressure, and his aura was similar to Ning Chongxian's. They were obviously experts of the same realm. However, Ning Chongxian's aura was fierce but not ostentatious. It wasn't targeted at others, but this middle-aged man had an aura that was like a raging wave crashing against the shore. In his eyes, the surrounding scenery and even the entire hall was shaking as if it was being swept by a monstrous wave. With such an expert standing beside him, I'm afraid that if it wasn't for that person who recognized the origin of this spirit tool, I might not have been able to walk out alive today. However, on the path of cultivation, there were times when one had to face things head-on. If one retreated at the first sign of danger, then one would find all sorts of excuses when faced with other difficulties in the future. It would be fine if it happened once or twice, but once one had a fixed mindset, the originally firm Dao heart would become dispirited and would no longer be resilient. As expected, the only way to improve one's cultivation was to work hard. He secretly made up his mind. Today, I'm not as good as this person, but that doesn't mean I won't be able to in the future. With this person and Ning Chongxian as my goal, I must always remember the humiliation I suffered today and use it as a whip. One day, I must personally seek justice for this. In the main hall, Du Yu wanted to teach Zhang Yan a lesson today, but he couldn't. He was too ashamed to show off in front of all the new disciples. After saying a few perfunctory words, he dismissed all the disciples. Back at the residence of the eldest disciple in the back hall, Du Yu complained to the middle-aged man, Uncle Bo? Why did you stop me today? Uncle Bo was called Du Bo. He was the bodyguard sent by Du Yu's father, whose identity was still unknown, to secretly protect him. Originally, this person didn't have this name, but in order to cover up his identity, he changed his name and claimed to be a disciple of the Du family. Du Bo shook his head and said in a deep voice, if I'm not mistaken, what Zhang Yan used just now was the divine shuttle. Divine shuttle? Du Yu was stunned. He seemed to have heard of this name, but he couldn't remember it for a while. Du Bo reminded him, you can't remember the divine shuttle, but your nephew must have heard of the 12 sky shuttles, right? Du Yu was shocked and cried out involuntarily, 12 sky shuttles, isn't that the magic weapon used by the sect leader when he was young? Yes, the divine shuttle is an imitation of the 12 sky shuttles. It was made by Elder Sun Jian of the sect. Elder Sun is the 9th disciple of the sect leader, the backbone of the master and disciple line. This Zhang Yan can get one of the divine shuttles, so he must have a close relationship with the sect leader. And your identity is special, so it's not appropriate to kill him now. Du Bo pointed out the pros and cons and pointed out Zhang Yan's possible background. It wasn't that he couldn't kill him, but he really couldn't. Anyone who had a relationship with the sect leader of the Yingzang sect couldn't be considered by himself. Du Yu came from the aristocratic family and was raised as the future pillar of the family since he was young. He still understood this principle. However, he was still young after all, a disciple who did not come from an aristocratic family. Right now, he could not suppress him, he could not control him, and he could not hit him either. It was really sullen. He could not help but hatefully say, as long as I am the eldest disciple, Zhang Yan will not be able to take away any of the elixirs, Hua Qi, Taoist books, or instruments bestowed by the upper house. Only by ruthlessly depriving Zhang Yan of the things that originally belonged to him could he vent a little of the anger in his heart. However, Du Bo's face was full of disapproval and he scolded, "Nephew, don't forget, the position of the lower house's eldest disciple is only temporarily borrowed. It's only to be able to use the shellfish field properly and use the Shell King True Nectar to open a high-grade pulse no less than that of the sect leader's disciple. How can you wholeheartedly be attached to this position?" Du was reprimanded by Du Bo, but he didn't get angry. Instead, his eyes brightened. "Between a mere lower house disciple and a true disciple, don't tell me the upper house immortals can't tell which is more important." Du nodded in agreement. He was a young man and his thoughts were always straightforward. If someone insulted his face, he also wanted to take revenge and didn't like to beat around the bush. However, since Du Bo said it like this, he could only listen no matter how unwilling he was. Du Bo seemed to see through his thoughts and smiled, "Nephew, you seem to be worried. Fine, I will teach you a method. You don't need to make a move and you can still peel off the skin of Zhang Yan's face, making him unable to stand on the mountain." Du's eyes lit up and he jumped up. "What method?" "Uncle Bo, please teach me." The cave residence on the star-gazing peak is the property of the lower house. As the eldest disciple, you have the responsibility to arrange a place for the disciples to cultivate. I heard that Zhang Yan is living alone on the star-gazing peak. You can order Zhang Yan to retract the star-gazing peak and say that there are other arrangements. Then order Zhang Yan to move to the moon-grasping peak. However, the lower house disciples are different from him. If he goes there shamelessly, he will definitely be ostracized by them. However, I see that Zhang Yan is arrogant and would rather break than bend. If you take away his residence, he will definitely not have the face to stay on the mountain. In this way, you can easily drive him off the mountain. You can also pretend that you don't see the heart, and it won't be too late to find trouble with him in the future. As an inner disciple, it was reasonable for Zhang Yan to move to the moon-grasping peak. No one could find fault with it. On the contrary, the disciples who didn't know the truth would praise senior brother Du for being considerate to his junior brother. If Zhang Yan stayed on the star-gazing peak and didn't leave, it would give the people an excuse to deal with him. But if he was driven out of his original residence, would he still have the face to stay on the mountain? And without the cave residence, could he still cultivate in peace? Du Bo's plan could be said to be a drastic measure. Good idea, good idea. Uncle Bo, please wait a moment, I will immediately order the people to do it. Du thought of this method, the better it was. He excitedly ran out to arrange it. Chapter 28. At sunrise, a small golden sword pierced into Zhang Yan's cave with a slight buzzing sound. Zhang Yan caught it and opened the letter on the golden sword. He was surprised. "You want me to leave Stargazing Peak and cultivate at Moon Seizing Peak?" He chuckled and casually tossed it aside. He knew Du's intention. It was to make him too ashamed to stay on Mount Azure Parasol. However, he did not care and played with the small golden sword in his hand. This should be the legendary Howling Lake Golden Sword. During the Xianwen Assembly, Ai Zhongwen had suggested for Jing Sun to use the Howling Lake Golden Sword to invite Zhang Yan to fight against Mo Yuan. However, Jing Sun and the other disciples thought that Zhang Yan was just a mortal and was not worth using the Golden Sword to invite. However, now that Jing Sun had gone to the upper house and Du had become the lower house's eldest disciple, he used the Howling Lake Golden Sword to invite Zhang Yan to cultivate in another cave abode. Although the purpose was different, it was enough to show that Zhang Yan was no longer the same as before. In just a few months, he had risen from a nameless nominal disciple to an inner disciple with the help of the spell assembly. Even Du, a descendant of an aristocratic family, did not dare to touch him because of his possible background. He could only use the identity of the eldest disciple to force him to leave the mountain. Although every step he took seemed dangerous, he had taken advantage of the situation and never fell into a dead end. Golden Sword, oh Golden Sword, you didn't come that day, but you still have to go through me. Zhang Yan knew that Ai Zhongwen had suggested that Jing Sun use the golden sword to invite him. Now, he was using the object to imply that what was destined to belong to him could not run away and would return to him sooner or later. As for the gifts from the upper house, he was even more dismissive. Since when did the upper house help him in the slightest? It was just that he seemed to be in the limelight recently, which was not a good thing. However, he had intended to use the Shell King in the cave mentioned by Luo Xiao to open his meridians. It was just that it was troublesome for inner disciples to leave the mountain, and he was worried that he could not find an excuse. This came at the right time. He could avoid everyone's attention and also have a reasonable excuse. It could be seen that the world was not absolute. A good thing could turn into a bad thing, and a bad thing could turn into a good thing. Furthermore, once he successfully opened his meridians, then his status would also undergo an even greater change. At that time, he would not need to care about the expressions of the people in the lower house. After making up his mind, he put away the golden sword in his hand and said in a clear voice, "Brother Luo, it seems that I have to go down the mountain." Luo Xiao's beautiful eyes turned and her face revealed a bitter expression. She said pitifully, "Now I am homeless, I beg young master to take pity on me, please don't abandon me." Her beautiful eyes were red and swollen. If it wasn't for the fact that he knew her well, he might have been deceived by her. Zhang Yan laughed and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo's way of comforting people is really unique. Could it be that you think I was forced to go down the mountain? This Shang has been studying the Xianyuan secret manual for the past 2 months, and I feel that I have already understood the mysteries within. Now I can go look for the Pearl King's true nectar to open my meridians." Luo Xiao exclaimed in surprise. She stared at him with her beautiful eyes and said in surprise, "Looks like fellow Taoist Zhang isn't depressed." Zhang Yan laughed and said, "Why should I be depressed? I should be laughing to my heart's content. The lower house is just a temporary place for me to stay on my path of cultivation. Do you think I will be greedy for this place? Now in front of me, there is only opening my meridians and going to the next level. When I come back, the door of the upper house will be open for me." After hearing what Zhang Yan said, Luo Xiao immediately put away her previous delicate attitude and said seriously, "Fellow Taoist Zhang is really broad-minded and bold. But what I said is true. The disturbance of external things is just a passing cloud. If one is blindly attached to it, it will only confuse one's heart and cause one to lose one's mind. Only by holding fast to the beer can one clear the clouds and see the true spirit." When Zhang Yan heard Luo Xiao's words, it seemed to be very different from what Ning Chongxian had said not long ago. There were hidden hints and they could corroborate each other. He couldn't help but feel moved. These two people seemed to be vaguely pointing out something. Could it be the obstacles that he might encounter when opening his meridians? But since these two people were unwilling to say it directly, it was obviously not something that could be explained with words. There was no point in thinking too much about it now. It would only add to his worries. As long as his Tao determination was strong, there was no need for him to take these things to heart. "I'm sure fellow Taoist Luo has memorized the way to the shell field. I'll need fellow Taoist's guidance." Zhang Yan remembered that Luo Xiao said that the shell field that she discovered the other day seemed to be near the fluorescent cloud shell field. That day, the Yingtsang sect had not completely occupied the shell field, so they must not have controlled it well. The current situation must be very different from before. If they were to go all the way, they might encounter the disciples of the Yingtsang sect who were on duty. Zhang Yan expressed his worries, but Luo Xiao waved her hand heroically and said confidently, "This matter is not a problem. I remember that there is a big swamp in front of the cave. If there are Yingtsang sect disciples on guard, we can sneak through the water first and swim into the big swamp. They won't be able to detect us. Moreover, when I was chasing after the 5 upper house disciples that day, I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to find the way back, so I left a drop of blood there. With the sudden inspiration, it won't be difficult to find the cave again." Speaking of this, she frowned slightly, but my only concern is that Shell King. Although the longer the Shell King cultivates, the more beneficial it is to open the meridians with the true dew. But its temperament is tyrannical, and it will easily cause the earth aperture to move. I'm afraid it will attract the attention of the Yingzang sect disciples. Zhang Yan smiled and said, before we see the Shell King, it's not good for us to speculate. We can only plan after we enter the cave. Luo Xiao nodded and said, of course. Zhang Yan asked again, but how many days will it take to travel from the Azure Parasol Mountain to the Shell Field? Why do I need to walk? Fellow Taoist Zhang, you're looking down on me too much. Luo Xiao waved her hand lightly and a trace of pride flashed across her beautiful face. I'll take you on my mystic light. Zhang Yan carefully looked at Luo Xiao's complexion and said with a smile, Brother Luo, you haven't recovered from your injuries. We have plenty of time, so let's not force it. Luo Xiao snorted softly and said, although my injuries haven't fully recovered, I've already condensed a mystic light. It should be fine for me to fly for 4 to 6 hours every day. The earlier we get there, the earlier I can use the Shell King's true dew to recover from my injuries. At this point, Luo Xiao sighed and stood up from the cattail hassock. She walked around the Dragon Star sand cauldron a few times and said regretfully, it's a waste to leave this cauldron here. If I wasn't injured, it would be a piece of cake for me to bring it along. But now, I don't have the strength to do so. It's a pity that this cauldron is a magic treasure and can be sized as you wish. There's no need to think too much about it. Zhang Yan was open-minded and said indifferently, let's find a mountain peak and bury it. We'll get it later. That's the only way. Luo Xiao originally wanted to bring this cauldron to refine medicine, but it seemed like she had to give up now. The two of them packed up and found a mountain on the stargazing peak to bury the cauldron. Then, they took the rest of the medicine and quietly went down the mountain at night without saying goodbye to anyone. In order to avoid attracting the attention of the Yuzhang sect's upper house disciples, they didn't dare to fly for the first 10 days. They only relaxed when they were out of the Great Wei Dynasty's Hong province and far away from the Azure Parasol Mountains territory. From here, it'll only take about 6 days. We'll be able to reach a tributary of the fluorescent cloud shell field by following the Canal River. Luo Xiao smiled charmingly at Zhang Yan and said, fellow Taoist Zhang, please hold on tight to me. Don't open your eyes when the profound light flies up. Without hesitation, Zhang Yan walked forward and hugged Luo Xiao's waist. He felt that she was warm and soft. Luo Xiao's eyes flickered and revealed a flirtatious look. She glared at Zhang Yan and shouted, rise. A profound light soared into the sky and flew straight to the north. Half a month after Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao left the mountain, Diu also received a letter from his family asking him to go to the fluorescent cloud shell field to open his meridians as soon as possible. Moreover, they also sent him a flying ship in the clouds that could be used as a means of transportation. This flying ship was made by a cultivator in his Du clan who was good at forging weapons. Not only could it carry 100 people, it could also block flying swords. Its speed was also much faster than normal cultivators. This time, the clan had also helped him. For this trip, Diu not only had Du Bo accompanying him, but he also brought along 2 clear cheese staged disciples from the Du clan. There were also 10 strong men as guards and more than 50 servants. Diu looked at the clouds and mist on both sides of the mountain pass by him quickly and couldn't help but feel satisfied. He patted the flying ship and said, I heard that the shell field is called the fluorescent cloud shell field. This flying ship in the clouds is a good compliment. Isn't it hinting that I want to take over the Shell King? Du Bo looked at him and smiled slightly. He sat upright on the cloud canopy of the flying ship without moving. However, after flying for a day and a night, Diu also felt slightly bored. He opened his mouth and said, this time, Uncle Bo is accompanying me. He can help me subdue the Shell King and absorb the true dew. However, I wonder how strong the Shell King is. Du Bo laughed loudly and said, "The higher the Shell King's cultivation, the better the true dew and the higher your chances of forming your meridians will be. Uncle Bo, I hope that the Shell King won't disappoint me." Du asked curiously, "Although Uncle Bo is a master at the 3rd level of the mystic light realm, I heard that the Shell King is very violent and is very powerful when it hides in a cave. Moreover, its hard shell can't even be broken by flying swords. How does Uncle Bo plan to deal with it?" Du Bo stroked his beard and smiled. He said, "Nephew, you might not know this, but the Shell King is very gluttonous and likes a small fish called silver tear fish. As long as we catch some and place them at the entrance of the cave, the Shell King will be lured out when the fishy smell fills the air. Once it leaves the cave, it won't be able to hide and can only be slaughtered by us." "Oh." Du was puzzled. He said, "I've heard Mother talk about all sorts of rumors about the Shell King, but I've never heard of this before. She only said that every time a disciple of the upper house opens their meridians, they will ask a core transformation realm master to catch the Shell King." Du Bo laughed and said, "Nephew, although the Shell King can't transform due to the nourishment of the earth vein, it still has its own intelligence. This method can only be used once and it won't fall for it again. However, the Shell King in the Luster Cloud Shell Field has never tried this method before, so you don't need to worry. I'm here." Chapter 29. Wei Dynasty Dingzhou, Longyan Lake. A few days ago, Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao sneaked into this place along a river called Rong River. Zhang Yan's mortal inner qi had already been completely transformed into innate yuanjin, so holding his breath for a few days and nights was not a problem. They moved forward in the dark at the bottom of the lake bed, just to avoid the patrolling disciples of the Yingcang sect. Fortunately, they were very careful along the way, and the direction they were moving in was not the focus of the Yingcang sect disciples, so they successfully followed the edge of Longyan Lake and turned into a rather secluded body of water. This body of water was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, so if they walked on the ground or flew in the sky, they would definitely be noticed by the disciples on duty. With Luo Zhao's painstaking efforts as a guide, she accurately found the mark left behind, pulled on Zhang Yan's sleeve, and pointed downwards. Zhang Yan opened his eyes and saw that there was a funnel-shaped cave at the bottom of the lake, where the lake water formed a small whirlpool. Luo Xiao gestured for him to follow, and took the lead to dive down. The snake bell's figure in the water was even more graceful. Zhang Yan followed closely behind, and as soon as his body got close to the whirlpool, he suddenly felt a strong force pulling his body down. He relaxed his body, letting the lake water bring him to the bottom of the cave. After standing firm, there was a tunnel in front of him that led to an unknown place, but Luo Xiao had already disappeared. Zhang Yan's hands stuck to the wall of the cave, and he swam deeper into the tunnel. Not long after, his body suddenly loosened, and he was lifted up by a strong force. With a splash, he emerged from the water, and found that he was already in a spacious cave. Luo Xiao was standing on a stone platform not far away, waiting for him. Zhang Yan jumped out of the water, and came to her side, but his expression changed slightly. He turned to look, and found that there was a white skeleton on the ground not far away. From the clothes and attire, it seemed to be a cultivator. Zhang Yan immediately revealed a vigilant look, and said in a deep voice, "Could it be that someone has been here before?" Luo Xiao smiled lightly and shook his head, "No, I killed this person that day." Back then, Luo Xiao had fought with a mystic light stage expert from the Yuzhang sect, and both of them had mistakenly entered this place. After a bitter battle, she had killed this person here. However, when she came out, she discovered that 5 disciples of the Yuzhang sect were hurriedly swimming out, as if they had already seen the secret of this entrance. Luo Zhao's killing intent was immediately aroused, and he pursued them all the way to the Azure Parasol Mountains boundary. Only then was Ning Chongxian forced to Zhang Yan's Immortal's cave dwelling. Luo Xiao had already taken everything valuable from this corpse, so Zhang Yan no longer paid attention to it. He raised his head and looked around. He saw spirit shells wriggling on the walls of the cave, all of them sucking the essence of the earth veins. At a glance, there were at least tens of thousands of them. However, Luo Shao ignored these spirit shells and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, the Shell King is in the cave hundreds of meters below us, please follow me." The entire cave extended downward in a spiral shape, and as they walked down, a damp and moldy smell assaulted their nostrils. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, and it was slippery. The two of them walked and stopped for a while. After a while, there was only a wide cave in front of them, and the surroundings were filled with a jade-colored mucus, but it was empty inside. Strange, this is clearly the Shell King's lair, why isn't it here? Luo Shao walked around the cave a few times, and then went to the narrow cave that the Shell King usually resided in. From the remaining true dew in the surroundings, she could tell that this was the Shell King's lair. She could not help but frown, and she said, "Could this be a sun shell?" Zhang Yan asked, "Fellow Taoist Luo, what is a sun shell?" Luo Shao explained, "Shells are divided into yin and yang. Yin shells like to stay still and do not like to move. Even though they can travel in the cave, they will not easily move unless there is a strong enemy. Sun shells are different, and they like to migrate. After staying in one cave for a year or so, they will move to another lair." Seeing that there are only about 10,000 spirit shells outside, this Shell King must have lived here for a long time. Zhang Yan went forward and touched the semi-solid substance that looked like pine resin on the cave wall, and he said, "Is this true dew?" Luo Shao was a little dispirited, and she sighed, "It is true dew, but looking at the color of this true dew, it has been around for a day. It can be used to open the meridians, but it will still lose a lot of essence. It is best to absorb true dew within a moment." Only a day. This means that the Shell King has not gone far. As Zhang Yan spoke, he unintentionally exerted force, and with a chi sound, he was surprised to find that his arm had actually passed through the thick layer of cream on the cave wall. His eyes flashed, and he took 2 steps back. After taking a few glances, he went forward and tried to drill in again. He found that there was nothing blocking in the depths, so he simply exerted force, and his whole body was actually swallowed inside. Luo Shao had been watching Zhang Yan's actions, but she found that he did not come out for a long time. Her expression unconsciously tightened, and she called out, "Fellow Taoist Zhang." With a chi sound, Zhang Yan, who was covered in the true dew cream, came out from inside. He smiled at Luo Shao, and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo, it seems that there is another world behind this cave." Just as the two of them went deep into the cave, a cloud-occupying flying boat landed on the Ying cloud shell field occupied by the Yingsang sect. After a group of more than 60 people came down from the flying boat, Diu took out a absorbing tablet, and with a wave, the entire flying boat turned into a small boat the size of a square inch, and he kept it in his sleeve. When the 2 clear chi stage disciples who were in charge of guarding the shell field saw this, they immediately came up and scolded, "Who are you? Tell us your names." Diu saw that the tone of these 2 people was not friendly, and he was about to flare up, but Du Bo pulled him back, and went forward to cup his hands. "I am Du Bo, this is the eldest disciple of the lower house, Diu. We have specially come here to find the Shell King to open the meridians. I wonder if the 2 of you on duty have received the order from the sect master." So it is the disciples of the Du clan. The expressions of the 2 people eased up a lot, and one of them said with his hands cupped, "The sect master has already instructed that if you come, there is no need to stop you. Since this is the case, please do as you please, we are on duty, so we will not accompany you." Du Bo smiled, "Please do as you please." Seeing the 2 of them walk away, Diu snorted, and said, "They are just 2 disciples of the clear chi stage, why is Uncle Bo so polite to them?" Du Bo smiled and did not say anything. Diu had the support of the Du clan, so of course he could do whatever he wanted, but he could not do the same. If he could not offend anyone, he would try his best not to offend anyone. Who knew who was standing behind these 2 disciples? However, there was no need to explain these principles to Du Yu. From his point of view, Duyu's temperament was not stable, and when he suffered on the path of cultivation, he would naturally restrain himself. The lustrous cloud shell field was backed by the ring-shaped Daoli mountain, and in front of it was the mighty Longyan Lake. The river flowed around the mountain, and looking from the sky, the entire shell field seemed to be surrounded by the two, like a lonely land. Although it looked like it occupied a large area, the cave entrance of the shell field was actually only 10 feet in size. When Duyu saw it, the corner of his mouth twitched in disdain. At this point, the servants could only stay outside. Before entering, Du Bo respectfully bowed to the top of the cave where there was no one, and Duyu did not really understand. Du Bo did not say anything, and went straight into the cave. Duyu hurriedly followed, and behind him were 2 clear Qi stage disciples and 10 strong men. Not long after, the view in front of them suddenly opened up, and they saw that there was a steep slope on the ground, and on both sides were stone patterns that looked like folds. In front of them was a sunken basin, with a width of more than 100 feet and a height of more than 10 feet. It looked like a flat spoon. As far as the eye could see, there were densely packed spirit shells, and the sparkling and translucent light flickered, like the twinkling stars in the sky. This is the shell field. Duyu's breathing was slightly heavy. Although he was from an aristocratic family, and spirit shells were not rare to him, when he saw more than 1 million spirit shells gathered together, he could not help but feel shocked. Although this item is good, it does not belong to us. Du Bo patted Duyu's head. When nephew's cultivation is successful in the future, you can take whatever you want from these spirit shells. Duyu nodded his head seriously, and said, Uncle Bo is right. He clenched his fists, and thought to himself, one day, the owner of this place will definitely be me. Du Bo smiled, and walked into the depths of the cave with his hands behind his back. After walking for about an hour, the group reached the bottom of the cave. But what was strange was that after searching the entire cave, they actually did not see the Shell King. Du Bo frowned, and he thought to himself while stroking his beard, strange, why is the Shell King not in its nest? Could it be a sun shell? But the shell field is so big, and it has been fighting with the 3 lake demons for more than 10 years, so it can't be a sun shell. At this moment, a strong man suddenly shouted, Mr. Du, there is an empty cave here, but I don't know where it leads to. Oh. Du Bo quickly walked over, and pushed away the obstructing True Du in front of him. After taking a closer look, his expression suddenly changed, and he seemed to have thought of something. He could not help but chuckle, and he turned to Duyu and said, Nephew, if I am not wrong, it should be your opportunity. Duyu was puzzled, and he asked, Uncle Bo, what do you mean? Du Bo did not point it out, and he only pointed at the acupuncture point, and said with a smile, just follow me. He lowered his head and walked into the empty cave. The path was dark, and no one knew where it led to. After walking for a few miles, Du Bo suddenly raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. He listened for a while, and said in a low voice, You wait here, I will go ahead and see what is going on. His feet didn't touch the ground. Instead, he rode the mystic light and slowly approached the exit in front of him. When he came out of the hole quietly, he found that in front of him was a wide cave that was more than 100 feet high. Below it, he saw 2 Shell Kings at a glance. They were only a foot in size, and there was a layer of silver-white soft flesh under their abdomen. Their bone shells looked like they were made of crystal, and they were translucent and bright. The flesh and organs inside were clearly visible, and they gave people a feeling of agility and lightness. The soft light emitted from their bodies actually lit up the whole cave. However, at this moment, they were all gathered in front of a low acupuncture point. From Du Bo's point of view, he could see that it was filled with true Du, and there seemed to be some tiny things squirming inside. Good, 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 I was not wrong, it is indeed the Yin-Yang double Shell Kings. Du Bo stared at the 2 slightly uneasy Shell Kings, and he secretly sneered, harmonizing Yin and Yang, giving birth to the Shell Xian bead, what a good plan. The shell contains the essence of the earth vein, once it breaks out of the bead, it will definitely be able to get rid of the demon shell, and turn into a human. After another 100 years of cultivation, there will definitely be another great demon among the demon race. You actually want to deceive the heaven's secrets, you deserve this calamity in your life. If my nephew swallowed this bead, he will definitely be able to condense the best meridian in the world. Du Bo did not look anymore, and he turned to leave. But because of his agitation, he did not notice that on the opposite wall, there seemed to be two figures flashing by. Chapter 30. Yes, that Yin shell must have come from the lustrous cloud shell field. Carefully hiding his body behind the cave, Zhang Yan thought about the cause and effect. Du Bo must be here for Du Yu's meridian opening. What do you plan to do? Luo Xiao looked at Zhang Yan and said, I saw that person just now. He is an expert at the third level of the mystic light stage and has comprehended the mystic light penetrating object. His cultivation is not below Ning Cheng Xian. With this person here, the Xian bead will definitely fall into his hands. You have no chance of winning at all. Why don't you retreat now? Retreat? Zhang Yan shook his head and said with determination, I must get this item. Luo Xiao frowned and sighed, if I am at my peak, I can fight with Du Bo. But now. She shook her head, obviously not confident. Why do you need to take it by force? Don't you hear the sandpiper and clam fighting? Zhang Yan pointed downwards without the slightest bit of fear in his eyes. The Yin-Yang Shell Kings are all here, and they will definitely fight to the death to protect the profound bead. Although Du Bo is brave, it won't be easy for him to capture them. This is our chance. However, Luo Xiao refuted, although the Shell Kings are intelligent, they are still monsters that have yet to develop intelligence. With this person's skills, it is not difficult to kill them with a little trick. What you said is just your own wishful thinking. Zhang Yan smiled confidently and said with certainty, Du Bo cannot kill them. Why? Luo Xiao's beautiful eyes flashed with a trace of confusion. Zhang Yan patted the cave wall and said with a smile, did Luo Xiao forget that this shell field belongs to the Yucang sect? If the Shell Kings are dead, how can the field be maintained? Du Bo will not dare to attack and can only try to capture the Shell Kings. This will be even harder than killing them. Luo Xiao nodded and said, you are right. If this is the case, we do have some chance of winning. Zhang Yan looked past the two Shell Kings and looked at the cave behind them. He thought, the great fortune is right in front of me, how can I retreat? Even though the road ahead is filled with danger, if I don't give it a try, how can I be satisfied? To him, as long as there was a chance of success, he would not give up. He stared at the two Shell Kings that looked like they were made of crystal jade and suddenly turned his head to say, Dao friend, you must be familiar with how the Shell Kings fight? I can't say I'm familiar with them. I just know a thing or two. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, please don't hesitate to tell me. Luo Xiao nodded and didn't ask any further, and she spoke of everything she knew. At this moment, she wanted to see exactly how Zhang Yan would seize that profound bead. Zhang Yan closed his eyes and pondered. After a while, when he opened his eyes, an imperceptible light flashed in the depths of his eyes. From Luo Xiao's description of the Shell King's tactics, he realized that it wasn't that they didn't have a chance, but that they had the best opportunity to attack. It all depended on whether they could grasp it or not. On the other side of the cave, Du Bo returned with a face full of joy. After explaining the situation of the two Shell Kings, Du couldn't help but be ecstatic and applaud repeatedly. All of you, listen carefully. In order to give birth to the Shell Kings will have to use all their strength. But remember, this is the sect leader's personal property, you can't hurt them, just control them. Du Bo instructed the people below before turning around and rushing into the cave with a group of people. The two Shell Kings that were already feeling uneasy immediately felt that something was wrong. They spread their shell wings and seemed like they were about to flutter. When the Shell Kings were in the cave, they could rely on the true dew silk that they spat out to exert strength that was several times their own. But in the outside world, their strength was reduced by half. It was just that when they were giving birth to the shells, entering the cave would disturb the essence of the earth veins that originally nourished the shells, so they could only stay outside the cave. Dubo walked forward unhurriedly. He opened his hands and a trace of blue light immediately burst out from his body. With a schwa sound, it covered the two Shell Kings and actually made them unable to move for a moment. According to what was previously said, the 10 strong men and 2 clear chi stage disciples behind him immediately went forward. They squeezed into a group and tightly hugged the yin and yang Shell Kings that were a foot long. Du was overjoyed and couldn't be bothered to say anything else. He rushed into the cave impatiently. The 2 Shell Kings cried out anxiously and struggled with all their might. The blue light actually couldn't suppress them for a moment. A strong force came and more than 10 strong men were thrown onto the ground. Although the 2 clear chi stage disciples didn't let go, their bodies were lifted up and down by the force. The blood in their bodies couldn't help but churn. Dubo frowned and shouted loudly. The profound light on his body actually emitted the sound of flowing water, and the blue light that was emitted was actually as dense as seawater. Bei, who was surrounded by the light, was immediately pressed to the ground with 2 pa-pa sounds. Seeing that Du was only a few steps away from running into the cave, the layer of gills on the Shell King's outer shell suddenly slightly opened. An indescribable whistling sound spread in all directions. The 2 clear chi stage disciples' faces instantly turned pale and they no longer had any strength left in their bodies. The 10 strong men were shaken to the point that they couldn't stand still. They felt dizzy and a nauseous feeling emerged from the bottom of their hearts. Not to mention moving, they couldn't even move their feet. Du simply fell to the ground with a putong sound. He was clearly conscious, but his body didn't seem to belong to him. He couldn't move at all. Spirit shell sound. Upon seeing this, Dubo took out a medicinal pill from his body and swallowed it. Not long after, the originally blue profound light gradually turned into a dark blue color, as if it had condensed into a substance. At this moment, the veins on his face swelled up, and the color of blood surged up, intersecting with the blue light. It looked as if a layer of purple had floated up. He said loudly, "All of you, listen carefully. After I drag the Shell Kings into the cave, we will take the opportunity to block their escape route." He then turned to Du who was lying on the ground and said, "Nephew, don't panic. This sound can only control people and can't hurt them. Also, the sound can only travel 20 to 30 feet. After we drag the Shell Kings far away, you immediately rush in and swallow the Xian bead." After he finished speaking, he took a step back. The 2 blue lights were like 2 giant hands that grabbed the Shell Kings tightly and dragged them along with him. At this moment, Luo Xiao who was watching the battle from the cave above couldn't help but be shocked. He praised, "This person is really impressive. He can even speak when using the Xian light to attack his enemy. He has obviously cultivated the Xian light to the point of being able to absorb things and is about to step into the core transformation stage. Human cultivators are indeed 10 times stronger than us demon cultivators in terms of cultivation." She couldn't help but look at Zhang Yan again. In terms of a firm Dao heart, Zhang Yan was the best person she had seen. She wondered how far he could go in the end. At this moment, Zhang Yan was looking down without blinking. From the opponent's actions, he felt that the opportunity he had been waiting for was about to appear. Dubo's forehead was also dripping with sweat. It was obvious that the Shell Kings were giving him a lot of pressure. However, his feet were still as steady as ever. Like an old bull pulling a plow, he slowly moved backwards and dragged the 2 Shell Kings back to the cave he came from. Even though they kept struggling, they couldn't break free. When Dubo's figure gradually retreated into the cave, about 20 steps later, the pressure on the 10 strong men and the 2 clear cheese stage disciples lightened. They didn't dare to delay and rushed into the cave to completely block the 2 Shell Kings' escape route. Du Bo's voice came from the depths of the cave. Nephew, why are you still not going? What are you waiting for? At this moment, Du also felt that the strange pressure had disappeared. He struggled to stand up and staggered into the cave alone. At this moment, only Du was left in front of the cave. The rest of the people had entered the cave to help suppress the Shell Kings. Luo Xiao and Zhang Yan looked at each other. Both of them could see the flicker of surprise in their eyes. Opportunity. The two of them jumped at the same time, and in a blink of an eye, they followed Du into the cave. Because everyone's attention was focused on the Shell Kings, no one noticed them. Du broke through the cave that was sealed by the true Du. When he raised his head, he saw the profound bead that was filled with essence hanging under a stalactite. The silver light was flowing and flickering. He was overjoyed and went forward to grab it. He shouted, "Uncle Bo, I have found the profound bead." A faint voice came from outside, "Good, good, good. The true Du in the cave cannot be wasted. Nephew, quickly swallow the profound bead and refine the true Du to open your meridians. Uncle Bo, I can hold on for 3 days. You must dissolve the power within 3 days. Du didn't hesitate anymore and brought the profound bead to his mouth. Just as he was about to swallow it, he suddenly felt something and stretched his hand into his sleeve. Before he could make a move, the back of his head suffered a heavy blow. His eyes went black and he fell to the ground. His hand loosened and the profound bead rolled down. However, it was caught by Zhang Yan, who arrived in time. He suddenly felt a warmth penetrating his heart and spleen. Luo Xiao hurriedly said, "Daoist Zhang, the profound bead is in our hands. We should retreat quickly." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Why should we retreat?" He stared at the profound bead in his hand that was emitting colorful lights and said leisurely, "This place is protected by an expert of the 3rd level of the mystic light stage and has the true Du profound bead inside. It is obviously a great place to open one's meridians." Daoist friend is saying. Zhang Yan pointed at Du, who was lying on the ground, and said, "As long as this person doesn't go out, Du Bo won't dare to let the Shell King go. He said that he can hold on for 3 days, so why not let him hold on for a few more days and grind down his temper?" Luo Xiao muttered, "Although Daoist friend's thoughts are beautiful, if Du Bo becomes suspicious or sends people to check, wouldn't it be terrible? The first 3 days should be fine. Moreover, with Du in our hands, we can force him to lie to Du Bo for a few days when he wakes up. If he doesn't obey, it won't be too late to kill him." Zhang Yan had already made up his mind. Du was a rare commodity in his hands, so how could he not make full use of his value? Luo Xiao thought about it and felt that this method was feasible. She said, "If that's the case, Daoist Zhang, please swallow the profound bead quickly and refine it. I will protect you." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Thank you, Daoist Luo." He didn't hesitate anymore and opened his mouth to swallow the profound bead. Chapter 31. After Zhang Yan swallowed the Xian bead, he immediately sat down to cultivate. Luo Xiao walked around the cave a few times, and her gaze fell on Du Yu. Thinking about how this person seemed to want to take something out when he fell, she couldn't help but be curious. She walked to Du Yu's side, bent down, and searched his body for a while, then took out a sleeve pouch from his sleeve. I heard that the Du family of Helen's influence is spread across the 3 major sects of the Donghua continent. They are indeed generous, giving a universe sleeve pouch to a disciple who hasn't even opened his meridians. The universe sleeve pouch was a talisman used by the cultivators of the Xianmen sect to store their personal belongings. In a sect, usually only disciples above the clear chi stage and who have made contributions could obtain it. Even the mystic light stage disciple that Luo Xiao killed didn't have one. She didn't think that Du would have one before he even opened his meridians. She searched through the pouch. She didn't have much hope at first and only thought that she could find some medicinal pills to comfort herself. However, the result surprised her. First, he took out a black ink stone, and then he found a cloud-patterned vermilion brush. She said in surprise, are these Duda's soul-shaking inkstone and destiny brush? She kicked the unconscious Du and spat, Tui, luckily I acted quickly, or else I would have fallen into your trap. After searching the talismans for a while, she smiled. I didn't think that this brat could actually refine these 2 talismans. I wouldn't dare to take such treasures in the hands of others, but a brat like you who hasn't even opened his meridians is nothing. She stretched out her hand and violently wiped away the trace of blood essence from the 2 magic treasures, making them completely ownerless. Although this would reduce the power of the magic treasures, she didn't care. It was fine as long as they could be used now, and she could refine them back in the future. With these 2 talismans, if I fight with Du Bo, even if I can't win, I can still retreat easily. After putting away the 2 talismans, she continued to flip through the sleeve pouch, but it was met with an even greater surprise. Flying ship in the clouds. Good stuff. Martial profound gold dagger. It's really casting pearls before swine in your hands. Major elemental core. So many. What a generous kid. This is evil salt powder. Bah! Luo Xiao seemed to be afraid that something would dirty her hands, so she threw a bag of medicinal powder to the side. She continued to rummage around and found a large pile of scattered items. Finally, she took out a few Taoist books, and her gaze fell on one of them. Tai Golden Book. Luo Xiao was shocked. This was a famous cultivation technique among human body cultivators. According to the legends, after successfully cultivating it, one would be able to melt gold and melt iron at the clear qi stage, transforming qi into swords. If one could cultivate it all the way to the mystic light stage, the profound light that would be emitted from one's body would be comparable to a flying sword magic treasure. This time, Du was here to open his meridians. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, he did not lack any books, elixirs or artifacts. As for this Taoist book, his mother, Du Luo, had used many favors from the Du family to obtain it from an expert. Du regarded this Taoist book that his mother gave him as a treasure, and always kept it close to his body. Luo Xiao glanced at Zhang Yan, who had already entered a meditative state, and giggled, saying, "Fellow Zhang, this young master Du sure is generous to you. Even this servant is a bit jealous of fellow Taoists' luck." This is a clear qi cultivation technique that only those with high or middle grade meridians can cultivate. It all depends on whether or not you have this good fortune after opening your meridians. Zhang Yan had already sealed his 5 senses and turned a deaf ear to Luo Xiao's words. The cultivation technique of the mystic origin internal meditation technique was abnormally dangerous. Although he had already familiarized himself with the cultivation technique from the remnant jade, he still did not dare to let his guard down. He carefully guided the flow of qi in his meridians. Once the profound bead was swallowed into his stomach, a cold current first sunk into his dantian. It was as if he had swallowed a 10,000-year profound ice. The blood vessels in his limbs and bones suddenly shrunk, and the cold air rushed straight to his head. Following that, the profound bead released a gust of hot air from his chest to his abdomen, all the way down to his feet. The 2 qi vessels, one yin and one yang, occupied the upper and lower ends of his body. It did not seem like they came from the same source, but more like 2 enemies facing each other. Zhang Yan knew that this was because after the 2 shell kings had intercourse, the profound bead that was conceived was not perfect yet. However, it was also the most suitable time for him to swallow it. If he was a step late, the yin and yang would fuse, and the shell would break out of the bead. Then there would be no more hope. The first step of opening his meridians was to carefully guide the 2 qi vessels to merge into one, so that the essence of the profound bead could be used by him. At first, he carefully extracted a strand of the yin and yang qi and slowly merged them together. This was a test of his control over his qi. When the 2 qi vessels converged, the amount that was extracted must be the same, not one bit more, not one bit less. But not long after, he realized that with the experience of using qi previously, it was extremely easy for him to do this. He simply extracted more than 100 qi vessels in one breath and circulated them in his meridians. Not long after, he completely merged the 2 qi vessels into one and stored them in his abdomen. It was as heavy as mercury. At this point, all the conditions needed before opening his meridians were complete. Next was to circulate his mental cultivation method and use the qi of vitality to envelop the medicinal power of the profound bead. It would travel through his meridians and secret acupoints to break through the various shackles that restricted his body and cut off the shackles that bound his body to the path of immortality. In one stroke, he would create a body suitable for cultivating superior cultivation methods as an immortal. Calming his mind, Zhang Yan circulated the profound origin technique that he was already extremely familiar with and started to circulate it through his meridians. Not long after, he realized that this profound origin internal meditation record was simply tailor-made to refine the profound bead. Every single part of his body, even the most concealed meridians, were repeatedly cleansed along with the circulation of the technique. The medicinal power contained within the profound bead was not wasted in the slightest and was completely refined by him into every corner of his body. There was not a single place that he didn't take into account. At this moment, he felt his heart beating like a drum, the surging blood in his entire body was like a tidal wave in his ears, every single acupoint was moving vigorously, and the circulating qi beneath his body seemed to want to rush out from under his skin. It was as if there was a hammer constantly hammering on every part of his body, even his joints and tendons were trembling together. He didn't pay attention to these movements and only guarded his mind, wholeheartedly focusing on moving and transporting the profound bead. After the entire technique was smoothly circulated and the qi flowed into every single Dan acupoint, he suddenly felt that his surroundings were quiet. This was a feeling of extreme stillness, as if the heaven and earth hadn't been created, the primordial chaos hadn't been judged, a mysterious state where nothing was born. He was in a trance, forgetting his own world, his mind and consciousness seemed to be faintly discernible. He didn't know how long he had been in this stillness, but suddenly, a spark of inspiration rose in his heart and he asked himself, "Who am I?" Answer, "I am me, I am not me, I am also me, I am still me." Once this realization came out, he heard a clang clang sound like a sword colliding, and also like a mottled lock that had already rusted and fallen to the ground. Suddenly, as if some kind of restraint had been removed, his entire body suddenly became light. Luo Xiao, who had been guarding Zhang Yan all along, suddenly stood up, her beautiful eyes rippling with extraordinary splendor. She said joyfully, with the profound sound, "The golden lock will automatically fall. Congratulations, fellow Taoist, on becoming a person of my Tao." She looked up again, only to see a chaotic fog appearing from behind Zhang Yan. It was a chaotic mass, it was difficult to distinguish the profoundness, it was boundless and immeasurable. This was the pulse that appeared after Zhang Yan opened his meridians. Luo Xiao was startled, even with her knowledge, she was puzzled. What kind of pulse was this? The pulse determined a person's attribute after opening his meridians. It was divided into 3 grades, high, middle and low. The low-grade pulse had all kinds of strange attributes, such as wind, cloud, thunder, lightning, flowers, birds, beasts and insects. The middle grade pulse was divided into the 5 elements, and the highest grade pulse only had the 2 attributes of yin and yang. But the pulse that Zhang Yan opened was a cloud of gas. This seemed to be the fog that only the low grade pulse had. Could it be low grade? Impossible. Luo Xiao shook her head. If one were to say that the pulse opened by combining the wonderful record of Xianyuan and the bead was low grade, she would definitely not believe it. A thought appeared in her mind, could it be that the pulse that Zhang Yan opened was already above the high grade? This thought made her unconsciously jump in fright. Even though the people in the profound sect used all methods to condense their own pulse and step into the high grade, but this not only depended on the effect of the jade elixir essence pool and the superior method of opening the pulse, it also depended on one's own luck and comprehension. To be able to open a high-grade pulse was already rare, like Zheng Sun who opened a low-grade pulse, it was already considered to have a boundless future. High and middle grade were few and far between, and high grade were only heard of in rumors, but those who had such an encounter were all people with illustrious prestige in the profound sect. And this was not without reason, the higher the grade of the pulse, the more techniques that could be practiced. Although those low-grade pulse were unique and strange, it also meant that they had fewer choices of techniques to practice, so it was undoubtedly very difficult to find a suitable technique for themselves. If Zhang Yan's pulse jumped above the high grade, Luo Zhao's gaze also revealed a bit of complexity. She really could not imagine what kind of achievements this person would have in the end. For the first time, she was wavering on whether she should remove the blood essence oath or not. At this moment, there was another movement on Zhang Yan's side. The chaotic cloud-like phenomenon withdrew into the depths of his eyebrows, finally condensing there into a faint vertical mark. Seeing Luo Zhao, she was at a loss again. The pulse was the manifestation of the weak qi in the qi meridian, how could it condense into a substantial appearance? She suddenly felt that everything she knew was not enough to see through the various inconceivable things that had happened to this person at this moment. Zhang Yan's eyes opened, and in that instant, a bright light burst out and actually flashed through the entire cave. He stood up and felt that his entire body was incomparably light, and every movement he made was as light as a feather. Everything was different, as if he had changed into a different body. In reality, he could no longer be called a person now. Once his immortal meridians were opened, he had already taken half a step into the ranks of the immortal Tao cultivators. After returning to the Azure Parasol Mountain, he would ask a guru to evaluate his pulse, and then he would be able to enter the upper academy to practice an even more superior Tao formula. Chapter 32. Fellow Zhang, since your celestial meridian has been opened, we can leave. Luo Zhao tilted her head to listen to the movements outside and found that no one came over. It was obvious that she could take this opportunity to leave without a sound. However, Zhang Yan shook his head slowly and firmly and said, "We cannot leave yet." Luo Zhao was startled and said, "Why?" Zhang Yan's expression turned solemn and he said in a deep voice, "Do you fail to open his meridian this time? When he returns, he will definitely find the culprit. If he finds out that I succeeded in opening my meridian, he will definitely be suspicious. If he investigates carefully, he might be exposed. So." His voice became extremely cold, "I must kill everyone here." His words were filled with murderous intent and Luo Zhao felt a chill in her heart. However, after thinking about it, she felt that what Zhang Yan said was unrealistic. She sighed and advised, "Fellow Zhang, even though your worries are not without reason, this move is too uncertain. Let's not talk about Du Bo, just the 10 strong men by his side and 2 clear qi cultivators are not people the two of us can fight against." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he said, "What if it's only Du Bo?" Luo Zhao was startled and she frowned and thought for a while before saying, "If it's only Du Bo, he is already exhausted right now and I don't know how much battle power he has left. However, if we can waste him for another 2 days, I might be able to fight with the 2 new talismans in my hands. It's a pity that there are 12 people helping from the side." She shook her head and felt that there was little hope. Zhang Yan heard this and smiled. He clapped his hands lightly and said, "In my eyes, these 12 people are nothing to worry about." Luo Zhao sighed softly and said to Zhang Yan sternly, "Even though fellow Taoist has cut down the golden locks and opened the meridian, these 12 people are not just any ordinary people. How can you kill them just because you want to? Especially the 2 clear qi cultivators, their cultivation is above fellow Taoists. We have no chance of winning." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo, don't be impatient. I have a plan. We don't need to do anything. We can just borrow Du Bo's hand to kill these 12 people." Luo Zhao did not believe him at all. However, when she saw Zhang Yan's confident smile, she could not help but say, "Tell me about it." Zhang Yan, fellow Taoist, lean your ear over. Luo Xiao's beautiful eyes glared at him. She stroked her hair and moved her ear closer to Zhang Yan's face. Zhang Yan's eyes were filled with confidence. Daoist, Daoist, Luo, and Dubo, Dubo, and Zhang Yan, Daoist, Zhang, Luo, Luo, Yan, Daoist, Su, Daoist, and. However, Zhang Yan was full of confidence and said, "Fellow Daoist, just do as I say. There won't be any mistakes." Luo Xiao saw Zhang Yan's confident look and bit her lips. She stomped her feet and said, "I'll believe you this once. At most, I'll be buried with fellow Daoist. We'll just be Mandarin ducks." Zhang Yan smiled. "In the past, fellow Daoist Luo called me fellow Daoist. But now, you're saying it with sincerity." Luo Xiao could not help but roll her eyes at him. Zhang Yan said with a relaxed expression, "Even though Mandarin ducks are good, how can it compare to the carefree life of immortals? Fellow Daoist, don't worry. How can I harm myself?" Luo Xiao snorted and walked to Du Yu's side. She opened the locked qi channels in his body one by one. Then, with her back facing him, she placed a golden dagger on his neck. After sleeping for 2 days, Du Yu finally woke up. Just as he opened his eyes, he suddenly quivered. It was obvious that he was aware of the situation he was in. With the golden dagger at his throat and unable to see the other person's face, his body immediately trembled like a sieve. He said in fear, "I'm a disciple of the Du clan in Helen. I wonder who you are. We can talk it over. If you have any requests, my Du clan will be able to satisfy you." Luo Xiao said coldly, "Oh, satisfy you? Then let me ask you. Is there any secret method passed down to open meridians in the Du clan?" Du Yu's body trembled and he could not help but hesitate. Even though the secret method passed down was not the method of opening meridians, it was taught by the elders in the clan. It could make the opening of meridians smoother. These secret methods were the foundation of a clan's standing in the world. Outsiders were not allowed to know about them. Luo Xiao saw that he did not speak. She moved the golden dagger in her hand to his neck. Blood immediately flowed out. Du Yu was shocked. After all, he was only a youth and had never experienced such a situation. He still wanted to live forever. How could he be willing to lose his life for no reason? He hurriedly said, "Don't move, don't move. I'm willing to speak, I'm willing to speak. If what you said is false, you know the consequences." Du Yu did not dare to be dishonest. He immediately spilled out everything he knew in full detail, like beans pouring out of a bamboo tube. Luo Xiao followed Zhang Yan's instructions and asked many questions. Du Yu was not sure what the other party's goal was. As he did not know the other party's identity, he did not dare to lie. When she was almost done asking, Luo Xiao slapped Du Yu unconscious again. She turned to look at Zhang Yan, as if asking for his opinion. "It seems that this person is afraid of death and has a weak will. We can use him." Seeing Du Yu's performance, Zhang Yan felt that his chances of winning had increased. He narrowed his eyes and said, "If that's the case, let's see how long Du Bo can endure." 2 days later. Du Bo took out the last bottle of elixirs from his sleeve and poured them all into his mouth. The slightly dim blue light around his body rose again. He did not sleep or rest for 4 days, but the Shell King was still charging left and right, as if his strength would never be exhausted. Du Bo did not dare to relax. Once the Shell King escaped, it would definitely interfere with Du Yu's refinement of the Xian bead. Going berserk was a small matter, but his life would be in danger. He was the only one left fighting with the Shell King. Although the 10 strong men could take turns to rest, they could not persevere like him. All of them were floating and looked dispirited. The 2 clear Qi stage disciples had the elixirs to nourish them and were slightly better, but they did not seem to be able to hold on for long. He originally estimated that Du Yu would only need 3 days to absorb the Xian bead, but it was already the 4th day and there was still no movement. This made Dubo feel slightly uneasy. When the time came, he could no longer hold it in and asked loudly, "Nephew, are you all right?" Not long after, a mournful voice came from inside, "Uncle Bo, I only feel that my cheeks are burning and my legs are stiff. I don't know why." Hearing Do you speak, Dubo slightly breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he frowned and said, "Nephew, this should be because the effect of the mysterious bead is too strong, causing the chi to be unable to go down. The weak chi is blocked by water, and the heart fire is rushing up. Chanting your Du family's chi lowering technique will do." "Strange, did your mother not tell you before?" After a while, Du's voice came, "Mother did mention it before, but I did not take it to heart at that time. I only vaguely remember some of it, and I don't know if it's right or wrong." He then recited the incantation loudly, but halfway through, he became intermittent, as if he could not remember it anymore. Dubo was silent for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "Nephew, don't be anxious. Uncle Bo will tell you another incantation. It's a secret incantation passed down by your father. You must remember, do not hear a single word wrongly." Word by word, he recited the mental cultivation method that was supposed to be kept a secret. The two clear chi stage disciples were standing at the side. At this moment, one of them seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed. Suddenly, he went crazy and stopped suppressing the Shell King. Instead, he turned around and ran towards the exit of the cave. But before he could run 2 steps, he saw a ray of blue light catching up to him in the blink of an eye. It pierced through his chest and took his life. The rest of the people had different expressions. Some did not understand, some were bewildered, and some were terrified. But it seemed that they were all thinking about it. Dubo sighed in his heart, "Originally, I wanted to let you guys go for now and wait until I see nephew, then it won't be too late to deal with it. But now, forget it, killing one person is killing 10 people is also killing, why not kill all of you?" His gaze sharpened, and the blue light on his body suddenly retracted and released. The surrounding people only felt that their breathing stagnated, and they felt as if their heads were slapped by something. After a series of screams, these people's heads all burst open, and they fell to the ground dead. The 2 struggling Shell Kings suddenly felt the pressure on them loosen. Just as they were about to flop up, the blue light circled back and pinned them to the ground again. Dubo's chest rose and fell violently as he panted heavily. It was obvious that this action consumed a lot of his energy, and after losing the help of everyone, it was even more strenuous for him to suppress the Shell Kings. If this continued, his foundation would probably be damaged. He couldn't help but ask, "Nephew, do you remember the incantation clearly? You didn't say anything." "Nephew?" Dubo asked again. After waiting for a while, just when he was feeling a little irritated, Du finally spoke again, "Uncle Bo, I still have one part of the medicinal effect that has not been refined." Dubo suppressed the blood rising up his throat, thought for a while, and said bitterly, "Just one more day, we can't delay any longer." "One day is too short, Uncle Bo, just wait patiently, at most 2 more days will be enough." Hearing that Du was actually bargaining without any discussion, Dubo almost vomited blood. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that he had to use elixirs to recuperate for 2 to 3 years to recover his vitality. At this moment, in the cave dwelling, Luo Xiao heard the screams outside, and when she confirmed that those people were really killed by Dubo, she said in disbelief, "Is it really so?" Zhang Yan, however, looked like he had already expected the result. He shook his sleeves and said, "It will definitely be so." Passing on mental cultivation techniques was the foundation of a clan's prosperity. Zhang Yan knew that those strong men and clear chi stage disciples also knew that the cultivation technique should not be passed to 6 ears. Today, he wanted to borrow Duyu's mouth to say it, and deliberately let these people hear it. The most crucial point was that these people couldn't avoid it even if they wanted to. Because Dubo wouldn't allow it. Duyu originally wanted to borrow the Shell King's true Du to open his meridians, and the Xian bead was just an unexpected surprise. It should be the possession of the Yingsung sect's head. They stole it without asking, and after that, they would definitely try to cover it up and not let this matter leak out. Therefore, all the people around him were on the list to be beheaded. How could Du Bo let these people leave his side? What if they had ulterior motives and talked about this matter to the Yingsung sect's disciples outside? Zhang Yan finally said, "What I did was just taking advantage of the situation to make Du Bo do what he wanted to do a step earlier." That being said, he really did force Du Bo to kill these people, and he didn't need to do anything himself. Luo Xiao was surprised and admired. Today, she finally saw Zhang Yan's resourcefulness, and she unconsciously trusted him a little more. She couldn't help but ask, "When are you going to do it?" Zhang Yan's eyes flickered, and he smiled, "No hurry, let's grind this person a little more." In the next 3 days, whenever Du Bo asked a question, Du would always have a reason to evade. Finally, Du Bo found something wrong. Chapter 33. Over the past few days, Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao had been stalling for time not because they wanted to exhaust Du Bo's strength. Luo Xiao had used the Shell King True Dew in the cave and the major elemental elixir she got from Du to heal herself. Now, she had recovered 40 to 50% of her strength. However, Luo Xiao was also nervous when she was about to face Du Bo. She did not dare to be careless. She thought that once they fought, she would have to use all her treasures to kill Du Bo, otherwise, if Du Bo reacted, he might have other tricks up his sleeves. Her gaze wandered, but when she saw Zhang Yan's calm expression, she couldn't help but feel angry in her heart. She said, "Du Yuyan said that Du Bo still has a talisman in his hands. Fellow Taoist Zhang's wisdom is outstanding, why don't you think of another way to make Du Bo hand over the talisman with both hands?" Originally, she just wanted to use words to provoke Zhang Yan, but she didn't expect Zhang Yan to nod and seriously say, "I've been thinking about this matter for the past 2 days. I have a method, and I can tell it to fellow Taoist." Luo Xiao opened her mouth, but she did not know what to say. Could it be that this person really had a way to deal with it? She walked closer doubtfully and listened to Zhang Yan's whisper. After a while, her beautiful eyes gradually lit up. Although she had not used the plan yet, she already felt that it would work. Zhang Yan suddenly felt that Du Bo's aura outside was unstable, and he turned around to look and couldn't help but smile. "Fellow Taoist Luo, we have to stabilize Du Bo first. I think he won't be able to hold back any longer." Luo Xiao nodded and said loudly, "Du Bo, Du is now under our control. If you let go of the Shell King now, we can leave and Du will die. Have you thought about it carefully?" Du Bo was shocked. At this moment, he really did have such a plan. He heard that Du's mind was clear when he spoke. It did not seem like there was a problem when refining the bead. Instead, it seemed like he was being coerced by someone. However, he could not figure it out. Moreover, his physical strength had been exhausted and he was gradually unable to suppress the Shell King. Just as he was about to give up and get up to investigate, he didn't dare to act rashly after hearing these words. He asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" "Du Bo, why do you ask when you already know the answer?" This time, the sect leader allowed you all to use the true dew to open your meridians, which is already a great favor, but you all secretly swallowed the profound bead. How will your Du clan give the sect leader an explanation for this matter? As soon as this sentence came out, it was like seeing a glimmer of light in the fog, and Du Bo immediately understood a little. Someone from the sect leader's faction was making things difficult for the Du family. The internal strife between the sects was not something that happened only once or twice. The disciples of the master and disciple lineage had always been hostile to the disciples of the aristocratic families. They were even more resentful of the fact that they could enjoy the benefits of the various sects without fighting. It was very likely that they would do something like secretly attacking the disciples. Especially this time, the Du family made a big fuss about the death of a few true disciples and accused Ning Chongxian of deliberately not helping them. They even united a few families to put pressure on the sect leader. In order to appease the aristocratic families, the sect leader reluctantly agreed to let Du use the Shell King True Dew from the lustrous cloud shell field to open his meridians. It could be imagined that this matter would definitely cause the sect leader's faction to be dissatisfied. Especially now that they were in the lustrous cloud shell field, he really couldn't think of anyone other than the sect leader's faction who could enter this place. And the most important thing was that the other party was a female cultivator. Everyone knew that the sect leader had always favored using female cultivators. Not only could he use the method of marriage to rope in various talented disciples, but he also didn't have so many scruples when doing things, so he believed 80% of the other party's identity. He pondered for a while and felt that no matter what, this matter couldn't be used as an excuse by the sect leader to suppress the Du family. It seemed that he could only take responsibility for this matter. He sighed secretly and said, "Sir, please understand, this matter is all Du Bo's idea. Du is young and ignorant, so he misunderstood my nonsense. This has nothing to do with the Du family, and Du Bo isn't a member of the Du family, it's just that," before he finished speaking, he was rudely interrupted by the other party. "Humph, do you think it's important to me whether you're a member of the Du family or not?" What a joke. Du Bo frowned. It seemed that the other party didn't want to let it go. He couldn't help but feel angry in his heart, and his voice turned cold. "If that's the case, what's the point of saying so much? Do you think that I'm so easy to bully? Why don't you come out and meet me, and I will use our own means to determine the winner." Hearing that Du Bo's voice seemed to be about to explode, the voice on the other side chuckled and said, "Du Bo, to tell you the truth, at this moment in the lustrous cloud shell field, there is more than one person whose cultivation is higher than yours, and Du is in our hands. I advise you not to have any crooked thoughts. If you make a move, we will immediately kill you here, and then capture Du back to the sect. This is exactly what the senior brothers want." Hearing that, Du Bo was instantly shocked and fearful. It was possible that there were other Yingsung sect disciples outside the shell field to receive them, otherwise the other party wouldn't be able to come in. Just as the other party said, if the matter of embezzling the Xian bead was exposed, if he still dared to make a move, it would give the other party a reason to kill him. In addition, in the end, he still wasn't able to protect Du. He was afraid that his clan would be implicated by the Du family's anger, and his death would be in vain. Thinking clearly about the consequences, he immediately dispelled his original idea of fighting with his life, and his tone softened as he said, "What exactly do you want?" The other party's voice sounded unhurriedly. "How you take it depends on Mr. Du's will." Du Bo couldn't help but be puzzled. If the other party wanted to harm him, he would have already made a move. Why was he still not making a move? Was it because the other party's cultivation wasn't as good as his, and he didn't have the confidence? That didn't make sense. At most, he could just leave and take Du away, which could also make the Du family lower their head. His thoughts turned, and he thought hard. Then, combined with this sentence that had a profound meaning, he finally came to a realization. So this was the other party's purpose. If that was the case, everything could be explained. Thinking of this, he thought that he had already understood the other party's intentions, so he didn't panic. He said, "Can you discuss it with me?" "Speak." Du Bo probed, "You and I are both seeking to become immortals. We come from the same source, so why do we have to fight to the death? Moreover, since the Xian bead has already been swallowed by my nephew, I will give you some benefits. How about you let us go?" The other party was silent, and after a while, he said, "What benefits?" Hearing this, Du Bo was delighted, and his heart was even more certain. He said, "I have used up all the pills here, but I still have a lot of Xian beads. If you let us go, I am willing to give all I have to you. What do you think?" The other party sneered, "Du Bo, you are looking down on us too much. How much is a mere Xian bead's worth?" Du Bo's expression didn't change. "As long as you are willing to bargain, it won't be a problem. I am willing to make a vow that if you let us go, I will definitely repay you generously. Although the vow is good, I am not prepared to meet Mr. Du again in the future. In my opinion, I can only be at ease with what I have in my hands and what I have eaten. As for those things that are too far away, don't mention them. Zhang Yan looked at Luo Xiao with a smile that wasn't a smile. He didn't expect that she would use the exact words that he had forced her to say, which was quite aggressive. As if thinking of the tragic situation that day, Luo Xiao also fiercely stared back at him. Du Bo said again, then what do you mean? Luo Xiao said unhurriedly, I heard that you have a heart-piercing arrow and a mystic bird shield. These two magic weapons, one for offense and one for defense, complement each other. If you take them out, I can let you and the Du family go. Du Bo became silent, obviously seriously considering the other party's suggestion. Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao weren't in a hurry. In any case, the more they dragged, the better it would be to wear down Du Bo's vitality. They weren't the slightest bit worried that someone from above would come down to check. It should be known that opening meridians with the help of the True Dew and the Jade Elixir Pond took a similar amount of time. At least for the first half a month, no one would come to disturb them. After waiting for a long time, Du Bo slowly opened his mouth and said, this time, I only brought the mystic bird shield. The heart-piercing arrow had its spirituality damaged when fighting with a great enemy last month, and it hasn't been refined yet. Luo Xiao immediately said, I didn't come here alone. One mystic bird shield, I'm afraid it won't be enough. These words were very clear. It wasn't that she came here alone, one magic weapon wasn't enough. Du Bo was silent for a while, then sighed and said, fine, I have a purple hidden feather robe here. It's woven from Yuqing silk, it can block ordinary magic weapons and flying swords. I was going to give it to my nephew as a congratulatory gift after opening his meridians, how about it? Luo Xiao was about to open her mouth, but Zhang Yan whispered something at the side. Luo Xiao was startled, he looked at Zhang Yan with a strange expression, coughed and said, this method is good, but what can I do when I have a companion who doesn't need a magic weapon? It's just that I can't stand your Du family's face. Originally, I only wanted to make Du open his meridians, but I didn't expect this kid to gain such great benefits instead. He was even more furious in his heart and only wanted to vent his anger. He originally wanted to break Du's 4 limbs, but seeing that he's only a youth, he couldn't help but lose his status. He didn't expect Du Bo to actually respond so readily this time, saying, why wait for this matter? I can promise you right now. With 2 pa-pa sounds, he raised his palm and broke his own legs, then asked, is that person satisfied? This wasn't because his mind wasn't clear and he liked to harm himself, it was because this matter was really nothing to him. As a mystic light cultivator, he only needed to use mystic light to control his body and fly. Although there wasn't much mystic light left on his body, if he could sit down and rest for a while, he would be able to reattach his broken legs in less than an hour. However, he didn't expect that he would regret it not long after. Alright, Mr. Du is a trustworthy person. Wipe off the essence blood on the shield and send it over. Wait, how can I trust you? Mr. Du, I can swear a poison oath to the Emperor Heaven and Earth that if anyone leaks even a little bit of this matter, they will be struck by lightning and burned by the flames of the earth. What do you think? When Du Bo heard this, he felt that the other party was very sincere. Once a cultivator made an oath, it would immediately reveal the cause and effect. There was no room for falsehood, so he immediately agreed. Luo Xiao pointed to the sky and swore very straightforwardly. She wouldn't have leaked this matter in the first place. After the other party made the oath, Du Bo immediately relaxed and took out his magic treasure. He clenched his teeth and wiped off the essence blood on it. He couldn't help but feel his heart ache. He then took out the feather robe and used mystic light to wrap around it. He threw the shield and the feather robe outside the cave. He had also secretly planned to see who this person was, so he had thrown them a little closer to the entrance of the cave. Who would have thought that before they landed on the ground, a streak of black profound light would flash past, catching the mystic bird's shield and the feathered robe. He couldn't help but shiver. The other party really was a mystic light cultivator. Then, he felt at ease again. It seemed that the other party really didn't have the intention to be ruthless and just wanted to get some benefits. Otherwise, with the other party's cultivation, they could have killed their way in and killed him long ago. Even now, he didn't realize that he was falling into someone else's trap step by step. With the two treasures in their hands, Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao looked at each other and calmed down. Now that the magic treasure was gone, Du Bo was like a tiger without its teeth. His threat was reduced by more than half. The key to this plan was to use his power to pressure others and make Du Bo mistakenly think that they were on the side of the sect master. He couldn't fight them head-on, so he could only seek a compromise. In Zhang Yan's original plan, if Du Bo insisted on refusing, then he could only use the magic treasure in his hand to fight. If that didn't work, it wouldn't be too late to escape with the Luo Xiao mystic light. Of course, this was only the worst-case scenario. From Du Bo's performance on Azure Wu Mountain that day, Zhang Yan felt that this Du Bo wasn't a hot-blooded person who would do anything without a care. This person's personality was more conservative, so he was somewhat confident in this plan. He first got rid of Du Bo's followers, then swindled the other party's magic treasure and made him break his own legs. Now that the other party's shell was gone, and he had lost his claws and teeth, it was the best time to extract his marrow. Zhang Yan stood up and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Luo, if you don't make a move now, when?" Chapter 34. Du Bo, we won't make things difficult for you. We'll leave Du here, and you can take him away. Goodbye. After that, a black light flashed from the depths of the cave, and it seemed that the person had disappeared. Du Bo was slightly relieved when he heard that the other party had fulfilled their promise. However, he still didn't dare to be careless. He carefully listened to the movements outside, but other than a faint breathing sound, there was no other sound. It seemed that they really left. Du Bo's heart relaxed, and his eyes moved to the two shell kings that were suppressed by his black light. He took a deep breath, and his chest swelled up. His breathing also became heavier. With a "hey" sound, the two shell kings were pulled in front of him. Two palms slapped on their hard shells at the same time. Before they landed on the ground, another black light shot out and wrapped them up before throwing them far away. After doing all this, he seemed to have exhausted all his strength. His hands trembled non-stop, and he barely managed to suppress his surging blood and qi. A blue light rose out of nowhere and carried his body out. The shell of the Shell Kings was hard, and the two palms just now only caused a little shock to their internal organs. They would return soon after they recovered. He didn't have much true essence left, so he had to take Du away as soon as possible. When he flew out of the cave, he saw Du lying on the ground from afar. He couldn't help but be startled. He rushed forward to take a closer look, only to find that although Du was covered in true dew and dirt, he only looked to be in a sorry state. In fact, he wasn't injured at all. He calmed down and thought to himself, in the end, that person didn't dare to offend the Du clan. He slapped away Du's Qi meridian that was sealed and was about to take him away. However, when Du woke up and saw Du Bo, he shouted, "Uncle Bo, quick, quick, it's Zhang Yan who took the Xian bead, and he also took my magic treasure. Uncle Bo, quickly take it back." Zhang Yan. Du Bo was shocked. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, and a bad feeling welled up in his heart. He said in a deep voice, "Nephew, there's no need to say any more. We'll deal with everything after we get out of here." Just when he was about to fly away, he heard someone say loudly, "Mr. Du, why are you in such a hurry to leave? You'd better stay here obediently." Du Bo looked up and saw an inkstone that was as black as ink appear above his head. At first, it was only the size of a palm, but in the blink of an eye, it had expanded to a radius of 100 feet. It came crashing down toward him with a domineering aura. Soul-shaking inkstone. Du Bo's eyes twitched. He knew that Du took a family treasure with her this time, but he didn't expect it to be this magic treasure. The origin of this inkstone was not simple. It was originally refined by a core formation cultivator from the Du clan called Duda. Once it smashed onto a cultivator's body, it would immediately shake their soul, freeze their true essence, and lock their corporeal body. They would not be able to move at all and could only be smashed to death. The moment this inkstone appeared, there was no doubt that the other party wanted to take his life here. Only now did he realize that everything that happened earlier was all part of Zhang Yan's scheme. For a moment, he was both shocked and furious. But now, not only was his true essence exhausted, more than half of the profound light on his body had been consumed. He wasn't afraid of Zhang Yan, but he was worried about the mystic light stage cultivator that was hiding in the dark. Once this person made a move, he felt that it was absolutely impossible to resist. He couldn't be entangled here any longer. The only way out was to rush out of the cave and make plans after returning to the Du clan. Thinking up to here, he flicked his finger and a white light flew out. This was the evil-warding jade pendant that was bestowed by the clan. No matter what kind of magic treasure it was, it would be able to temporarily block it. After the jade pendant flew out, it took the initiative to collide with the treasured inkstone. The inkstone seemed to be held up by something as it slightly paused in the air. But after a moment, the majestic force crushed it into pieces with a "kacha" sound, and the inkstone's momentum didn't reduce as it continued to descend. However, this block had already bought time for Du Bo, and seizing this slight gap, a blue-colored streak wrapped around him and Du as they swiftly flew out of the cave. Luo Xiao, who hid within the cave wall, couldn't help but be anxious when she saw this. Although the might of the Soul Shaker inkstone was enormous, it wasn't easy to maneuver. She was still unable to completely control it with her strength, so she was unable to stop for a moment. Thus, she could only shout out loudly, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, you must not let him escape." Just as the two of them were about to fly out of the cave, an azure light chased after them from behind. Du Bo suddenly felt a chill run down his spine, and he cried out in his heart, "Shit!" He barely managed to tilt his body and avoid being hit in a vital spot. Chi! The azure light pierced through the left side of his chest, then took advantage of the momentum to turn and cut off one of Duyu's arms, causing the latter to instantly emit a shrill cry that shook the heavens. Du Bo let out a muffled groan as his figure became sluggish in the air, and the profound light on his body flickered indeterminately like a candle in the wind, seeming as if it would be extinguished at any moment. The azure light circled half a circle in the air before circling back once more, and this time it flew towards his head. Wishful Spirit Shuttle. Du Bo couldn't help but smile bitterly. He was well aware of the power of the Wishful Spirit Shuttle. Even if he was at his peak, it wouldn't be easy to deal with it, so how could he dare to resist it head-on at this time? Helpless, he could only retreat back into the cave. Luo Xiao couldn't help but be overjoyed when she saw Du Bo was blocked. She reminded, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, although the Wishful Spirit Shuttle is powerful, this person has condensed his U-engine and profound light together. As long as the profound light doesn't dissipate and his head isn't cut off, his life is not in danger. You must not be careless." Zhang Yan, who was standing behind the cave wall, smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. It's just a cornered beast struggle." Luo Xiao made a hand sign and shouted loudly. The soul-shaking inkstone fell again. This time Du Bo was unable to avoid it. He shouted loudly and the muscles under his clothes were faintly visible. He raised his shoulders and took the initiative to block the inkstone. The originally vast profound light suddenly shrank and condensed into the size of a palm with a "hua" sound to protect that area. Bang! The Soul Shaker inkstone smashed right on Du Bo's shoulder, but unexpectedly, his profound light was condensed. It seemed to be a thin layer, but it was as flexible as water. It actually protected his shoulder from the beginning and took this blow, causing the Soul Shaker Inkstone to not be able to directly come into contact with his body. He didn't make a sound and knelt on the ground. He fiercely straightened his back and unexpectedly pushed the inkstone up a little. Luo Xiao let out a sound of surprise, but she was not surprised. Du Bo seemed to be tough and unyielding, but in fact, he was already a tiger in a cage, a flood dragon in shallow water. Even if he could hold on for a while, it was just a last-ditch struggle. She thought to herself, if so, I need to add another fire to send you on your way earlier. She waved her hand and another treasure was thrown into the air. This was a cloud-pattern vermilion brush that was about a foot long. The body of the brush was full, and the brush shaft was painted with golden lacquer. Once it was in the air, the tip of the brush moved up and down like a person nodding his head, and a chi activity instantly enveloped Du Bo, announcing Destiny Brush. Du Bo cried out involuntarily. At this time, he hated Du Luo for spoiling her son too deeply, so much so that she even asked for this treasure to be given to Du Yu, but she did not tell him about it. Now, he had to bear the bitter fruit. At this moment of life and death, he could only fight to the death. With a shake of his wrist, a small silver arrow slipped into his palm, and with a raise of his hand, he threw it towards Luo Xiao. This small arrow arrived in front of Luo Xiao in the blink of an eye, and she couldn't help but change her expression. However, just when this small arrow was about to reach her body, a shield that looked like a bird spreading its wings suddenly flew out and stood in front of her. With a dang sound, the arrow and the shield fell to the ground at the same time. Mystic Bird Shield. Seeing that the other party used his treasure to block the attack that he was determined to kill, Du Bo was so angry that his vision turned black. The blood that gushed up his throat could no longer be suppressed, and it spurted out from his mouth. At this time, the announcing Destiny brush had already circled around his body, and the blue mysterious light on his body was suddenly shaved off a layer. After circling again, it dimmed a little. Seeing that the mysterious light was gradually thinning, his expression suddenly changed. Now, his body was like a broken shell, and only the trace of Yuan Zhen that he tried to squeeze out from the orifice of his dantian was still holding on. He knew that he could not escape today no matter what. Thinking of this, he immediately made a decision. With a sigh, he stretched out his hand and put it on Du Yu's shoulder, and said to himself, I only hope that your mother can understand my painstaking efforts. He stretched out his hand, and most of the mysterious light that was originally surrounding his body moved to Du Yu. Then, with a flash of light, it actually wrapped around Du Yu and flew out. After doing this, blood oozed out of Du Bo's 5 orifices. He had completely given up resisting, but as long as he could save Du Yu's life, his family could also be saved. He could only hope that the Du clan would avenge him after knowing the truth. As the announcing Destiny brush circled in the air again, the last remaining layer of mysterious light on Du Bo's body was also shaved off. At this time, the soul-shaking inkstone pressed down without any resistance, and with a bang, Du Bo's whole body was smashed into pieces. Not even a trace of Yuan Zhen could escape. Du Yu originally thought that he had escaped after being sent away by the mysterious light, but he did not expect that the divine Rui shuttle would catch up and pierce through his chest and abdomen. He let out a cry, and blood spurted out wildly as he fell from the air. Seeing that the divine Rui shuttle circled in the air for a while, as if it was going to fall again, Du Yu's eyes were filled with fear, and he shouted, Zhang Yan, if you kill me, my Du clan will definitely destroy your spirit and soul. If you let me go today, I will definitely report to the sect master. He will honor you as the eldest disciple of the lower house, and you can take any magic treasures or pills you want. Zhang Yan ignored his nonsense, and with a spell, the divine Rui shuttle flashed through Du Yu's neck as if it was cutting through soft mud. A big head rolled down, and with another circle, it chopped the floating Yuan Zhen into pieces. At this point, Du Yu and Du Bo no longer existed in this world. With the great enemy eliminated, Zhang Yan could not help but feel relieved. With the death of these two, there would not be a third person in the world who would know that he had swallowed the mysterious bead, and from then on, he could return to the sect with peace of mind. He slowly let out a breath, looked at the corpses at his feet, and turned to Luo Xiao, who had walked out of the cave wall, and asked, "Fellow Taoist Luo, is there a way to dispose of these two corpses without leaving a trace?" Luo Xiao thought for a moment, and her eyes lit up. She clapped her hands and said, "There is a way." She took 2 quick steps forward and picked up a bag of medicinal powder from the ground. Holding it in her hand, she said, "This is evil salt powder. Just a little is enough to corrode and pierce through metal and stone, and it's the most suitable to use to destroy corpses. In this way, we can dissolve the corpses of Du Yu and Du Da, but we can leave the corpses of those 12 people." Luo Xiao covered her mouth and chuckled. Fellow Taoist Zhang's method is to make Du Bo bear a bad name even after his death. Zhang Yan lightly smiled, and just when he was about to speak, his expression suddenly changed as he felt a faint throbbing in the world, and his gaze couldn't help but focus as he said in a low voice, "The lightning tribulation is coming." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.